that they have to come to that decision themselves. I can't tell them you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. They're not going to listen to me. They're going to find someone else who's just going to give them the drugs and say thanks for the money and run off with it. But if I have a call with a kid and I'm able to convince him like it's not for you, I give him a refund. 30 minutes out of my time to save a kid's life, I'll do it.
Mm-hmm. It's time to sit down, keep it real, and cut the bullshit. Welcome to Table Talk. All right, guys, we're back with another episode of Table Talk. Today, my guest, Tom's guest, is Tanner Tattered. Is that right?
That's right. Yep. Okay.
Here's how I'm going to introduce you because it's from your Instagram, and it cracked me up. So, poser emo gym rat, right? So that would be the first thing. And then the way I would explain kind of what you do is you're taking enhancement biological information, dumbing it down for Z-Gen, Gen Z, whatever it's going to be. For the younger kids coming up, that because they're being bombarded with PED information, which we've discussed on the podcast a lot of times, because is it good, is it bad? You know, there's always the debates going back and forth with that. The fact of the matter is, it's there. You know, so it's not going to change. I think it's a net positive, because now people are talking about it more. To when I was coming up, it was more of how do you dodge the question. There was the group of people that just flat out lied, and then you knew they lied. Then there are the other ones that would just strategically just turn the conversation in a different way, aka maybe like The Rock. You know, you can't say he's lying because he's avoiding, you know what I'm saying? And and we had reasons because people were going to jail and for distribution and stuff. It was way different then than it is now. And then shortly after, maybe Boston, you might know a little bit more as we get talking here, maybe Boston Lloyd kind of broke the ceiling on that a little bit. But at some point with HRT clinics and stuff like that, it began to not become as demonized or canceled. I mean, it's still kind of canceled, but not as demonized, so more information's out. So then that leads into the high schools, junior highs, and for all we know now, grade school. You know,
haven't seen that yet.
You don't know how deep it goes, right?
Yeah.
So, and so that opens up a whole can of worms to where there's a lot of people that just say absolutely don't do it. Where I started when I was young, you know, so, and nobody really was deterring me, and nothing they were going to say was going to make any difference there. And so I think where you come in is on that other end, to where instead of being the 50-some-year-old guy saying, man, you should probably wait until you're so-and-so and so and for all these things, because I was on that side of the table at one point. So I know what it's like to be there and to think, man, shut the fuck up. You've been retired for 10 years. You're fucking over the hill, all this, and it doesn't matter. But when the message is coming from somebody that's in their generation, who's around the people that have been through the gambit, learning from them, but then yet learning from the people that are coming up. So you're learning from the people above you and you're learning from the people that are coming up. Then you're able to distill the information on your social media in a very good way. And by putting things out I wouldn't even think would be necessary until I would see it. And it's, you know, like people fucking up insulin and GH. You know, just because they don't know the metric system, basically, you know, to be able to do that. You would think nobody does that, but then I saw that when I saw that, I'm like, I know 4 people that basically passed out because they overdosed on the fucking insulin, thinking it was. So that's kind of my introduction of what you do. There's more to it than that. I believe did you graduate?
No, so I went to the University of Colorado. Different, totally unrelated to the whole scientific thing, and then that took off while I was in school, and I ended up totally pivoting and pursuing this full time.
Okay, cool, because I think it was a finance degree you were working towards. You were pretty close to finishing, though. Yeah,
right about at the end of it.
All right, backup plan, right?
Right.
Okay.
Exactly.
So here's where I'm going to start, right? because this is going to be interesting to see where this take goes from here. As it is written, for your sake we face death all day long. We are considered as sheep to be slaughtered. Romans 8:36. Romans 8:36 is put on your Instagram. So what's the reason for putting that up there?
It sounds like a great death metal lyric.
Well, I know, right? So, of all the things you could have started with, wow, that's such a blast you picked that. So
That's why I did it.
we're diving right in. No, this is perfect. I think a lot of people have like certain perceptions of, faith and religion, whatever. And some people see it as like sunshine and rainbows and flowery meadows. And it's like, yeah, it's always going to get better and whatever. But I like taking even the little darker corners of the book and reminding people that like life is multifaceted, just like your faith. So let's say remove religion from it. Let's just look at what this phrase is saying. You're killed all day long. Wow, that's a reassuring pick-me-up line. But then you start to kind of look at your own life. It's like, remind yourself of all the adversities that you've gone through, all of the trials, and then you start to realize that a lot of the trials that you're putting yourself through are a tunnel toward treasure. Every piece of adversity that you're facing is just making you a greater adversary to the things that threaten what you care about most. So reminding guys, like, if it feels like you're getting killed all day long, and that could be physically, you go into the gym, you have to destroy yourself. There's not really room to just like, oh, I'm going to do a little bit of this, do some Pilates, whatever, and then expect to look like Ronnie Coleman. You've got a little bit backwards. So reminding yourself that killing yourself all day long is actually something that is, I would argue, partially necessary to being a man worth his salt.
Well, that's interesting because one of the churches that I visited when I was on my vacation here the last couple of weeks was when you were inside, the whole thing was human bones.
Yeah.
Right? All in like little skulls and like baby skulls. And it's like kind of creeping you out because a lot of babies didn't survive in medieval times because doctors are like, slaughtering a cow and then giving birth and so forth. So the whole thing, if I understand the concept correctly as the guide was explaining this, it was, you have the church, which is basically putting the throttle down on everybody, with fear and so forth for their faith. And then this on this side, the way she explained it was the way that we look at life now. Like we all just assume we're going to live to be 80, so there's 20, 40, 60 years, until you die. Where they wanted to have a place to where they could go and meditate and see death every single day, to be reminded that of basically their mortality, but to be grateful for the life that they have because it can be taken at any time. Yeah. And that was kind of the pushback that they had to, the other church type of thing, which is kind of going with what you're saying here. It's kind of fucked up, if you really think about it, but we're not guaranteed anything. No. None of us are guaranteed that we're going to make it through the day, but we take that for granted. Now, if we sat in a church with a bunch of bone skulls, you would kind of be reminded like, oh shit, that could be me, from that. And it kind of seems like that's kind of what you were saying a little bit with this passage.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's a privilege to have that pressure. Although life is hard and awful, but it's like you're not dead. Like that pain that you're feeling is proof that you're still alive.
Yeah.
And I mean, in reality, life is hard no matter what you do, right? Like, if we bring that back to like a meathead scenario, like being strong, fit, healthy is really hard. Like, involves a lot of effort. You have to do things you don't want to do. But also being overweight with high blood pressure, super high cholesterol and all that stuff, that's really hard too. Like, that's not a pleasant place to be day in, day. So like, you pick your poison in that regard, right? So in that regard, it's just like, we're all going to suffer for something. So choose it wisely and choose something that gives you something back. And I like your point about like almost over focusing on the positive and the sunshine and rainbows, because without the other side of the coin, the sunshine and rainbows don't mean anything.
Bingo.
And we ended up having like a philosophical debate mid-session the other week where it was like, the stereotypical kind of idea of heaven, whatever that may look like in your faith, your religion, or whatever, if it really was that oasis where you just get everything you want with no input, would it really be heaven?
Yeah.
Because it wouldn't mean anything to you, right? Like if you just walked into the gym and someone's like, hey, here's an all-time world record, it would have zero meaning, right? So like at that point, without the suffering, does anything have any meaning? Without the threat of mortality and the skulls and everything and your death put in front of you, does anything you do actually then have a meaning in any context without it?
Oh, this shit's going to get deep real quick.
I'm just saying, like, you know, to me, that is what makes you have to do something.
No, but it makes sense, though, because if every training session was perfect and everything was a PR and you were guaranteed to grow from every single one of that, you would kind of get bored of it real quick.
Yeah.
I mean, we get bored of TV real quick, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also,
But then again, we get fucking addicted to it.
Yeah, that's true. But they also
not
wouldn't
rewarding.
be called great sessions anymore. They'd just be called sessions.
Yeah.
Because every session would be that way.
You need that spectrum. You need the contrast.
Yeah, so like your perception, if every session was inverted commas fantastic, eventually that would be your barometer for normal. And you'd need something that's better than that for you to have some kind of reward mechanism or perception that it was good.
Yeah, okay. So we're here. So how did you get to where you are now?
Yeah. Okay. So
How did it start?
Yeah. So full roadmap was, I basically started researching enhancements the same day that I realized that bodybuilding was a thing. And this is pretty rare for most people, but I remember walking into the living room of my college dorm and my roommate's on the couch, and I see like the biggest dude I've ever seen in my life in the little purple Speedo hitting that like Atlas pose. You know, I later realized it's Ronnie Coleman, but Lord knows why my initial thought was, what do I have to do to look like that? And that's when I started talking to my buddy a little bit more about like, okay, can I go to the gym with you? Like, can you take me in? Can you like show me how to work out? All of that. And that's just like really where the floodgates opened. So getting into the gym also meant like, okay, I know that guys who have been working out naturally, they have like a very lean athletic build, but I've never seen anyone look quite like that. You know, of course there's outliers like Mike O'Hearn, allegedly, but then I started to research, okay, there is performance enhancing drugs. And so if someone's going to look like they're at the top of their game, they're probably doing everything they can to present that look and that level of muscle mass. So it was complete random searching at first. It was like any forum I could find, digging through the archives, because these conversations go back into like the early 2000s. And for me, it was like the time that I was getting into it was like 2020 something. And so starting to find YouTubers online who are making videos about the content kind of in their early days. And then I was taking notes on everything that they were putting out. It was basically like I would go to college and do my day-to-day classes and then come home and then have this personal college class, which was trying to find textbooks about human biology, anything I could to research this stuff, learn more. And then once I started getting a basic understanding, around the same time I was looking at TikTok and seeing people posting videos online, whatever. Typical TikTok videos, especially my generation, was like some guy takes his shirt off, flexes for a little bit, puts some motivational quote over it. And like, I've seen a dime a dozen of these things. I'm like, they're so unoriginal. Like these things get hundreds and hundreds of likes, but I just don't see any actual value being provided. And at that same time, I was kind of jaded with social media because there's not a lot of educational content that's rewarded. But I could sense a sentiment among my generation that they wanted to learn. They didn't want to just be bombarded with entertainment and, you know, flashing colors and whatever. So I took a chance outside of my normal content, which was kind of just copying everything that everyone else was doing. And I barely got any followers doing that. And I made a video saying, getting on steroids is not going to make you look like Chris Bumstead overnight. And to a lot of guys, they actually did not realize that. They thought that, oh, well, if I just take like this many cycles, I'm going to look like Chris. And you start to set realistic expectations for the next generation about like, hey, listen, like the steroids are not magic. First of all, they only work if you do. And second of all, they might not even work that well. Like there could be limitations within your own genetics that you're never going to get to that point. Once that blew up, and then I got a lot of people following my content, I started just debunking these low-level myths where people would think, oh, well, I can take this steroid like without any side effects. Well, not really. And then you explain to them the science of it. So it started on basically like, if I had to explain it big picture, it's like beginning with kindergarten level content and slowly ramping that up to like grade level, middle school level. Whereas the guys at the top of their game, you know, Vigor Steve is a great example. One of my buddies, he's like, could easily do the like top level PhD level content if he wanted to. And sometimes he'll slip that information in there. But for someone who's watching a Vigorous Steve video for the first time, it could be a little bit inaccessible. And there's some content in there that's not quite readily handled. And so they need something a little bit more digestible. And that's basically where I came into the scene, helping guys to get that entry level education so that they can start to fully enjoy the content of the guys that I learned from.
So when you first came into this, and other people in the demographic that you're speaking about, when they see the Ronnie Coleman, they're not thinking training, like I need to learn everything about training. They're not thinking that first. They're thinking, what drugs is he taking? Mm-hmm. You know, because that would be, you know, one of those impacts of having more education out there, right? Because when I came up, possibly when you came up, you know, that really wasn't even a consideration. It's like, you know, we got to learn how to train.
Exactly.
You know, and we'll get to all that. I mean, that still becomes an important facet.
Yeah.
But it seems from what you're saying that the anabolic side, the PED side, is coming right at that same point. Like you have to learn to train, but there's PEDs as well, where before it'd be the training and then slowly be introduced.
Yeah, so I'll add that caveat that I saw Ronnie Coleman, where I think like for most guys in my generation, they'll see some influencer on social media, a guy who has like a really developed physique, like looks really good, lean year round, and they don't really realize that he's on anabolics until they start to see enough content around the topic. And then they understand this concept of fake natties, like, oh, this guy's using stuff, this guy's using stuff, whatever. There are some influencers who talk openly about what they're taking, or they just say that they're on stuff. But then the question is, okay, like how much stuff are they taking? And then there's that copycat mentality. So you really have to remind guys that copying things is not like the instant skip to my desired physique thing. You also have to copy their lifestyle and their diet and their genetics, which we can't quite do that yet.
Yeah. I mean, so they don't know that.
No, I mean,
for the most part.
I think a lot of people look at the drugs as if like, this is the way that I look like that. And it could be a step that's necessary, but that'll depend from person to person.
Yeah.
You know, I've seen people develop like incredible physiques on varieties of different cycles. There's not one way to do it.
I know that, but do they think they can do that and not train?
And that's what I have a really good example about. One guy that I've worked with before, I designed cycles for him. He wanted to do like one last hurrah, do a huge cycle, but he didn't train at all. He like was traveling too much, gambling, drinking a bunch, like didn't pay attention to his lifestyle at all. And there's a before and after picture of like before he started the cycle, he looked really good, like totally ready to grow, super lean, whatever. Now after the cycle, body fat's come up, lost a lot of muscle mass, and it's like almost proof where I'm like, guys, you finally realize the drugs don't work. You have to work for it.
Yeah.
So he has tons of followers, so I'm hoping people like are starting to get that concept now, and we can debunk the whole like, oh, well, steroids put on muscle mass when you're just sitting on the couch.
I did not know that was a concept.
Well, there's a couple of studies, isn't there? And like, but it's in untrained individuals. So people who've never lifted or never lifted to any meaningful extent, they gave them anabolic steroids and didn't have them train. They gave another group no steroids but had them train, and then the others just sat on the couch and got nothing. So they got completely fucked over. And the guys who took steroids but didn't train, I believe, gained more muscle on average than the guys and girls or whatever who did train but didn't take steroids.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, like, at entry level, steroids do put muscle on in the same way that any training program will put, even if it's completely stupid.
But also, if you're new to the gym, why are you using steroids in the first place?
Also,
so it's hard to recommend.
But you mentioned there, and this might be a bit of a tangent, so I'm sorry if it throws us way off, but you mentioned like fake natties and stuff like that now. So with social media and the proliferation of PEDs and, you know, everything else that is now being used that maybe don't fall into that category, do you think people even have an idea of what a top level natural physique looks like?
It's so muddled. It's actually a genuine nightmare, because I'll see people, I have really good friends who have worked tirelessly like 8, 9, 10 years on their natural physique, and they look very incredible. You know, their diet is dialed to a T. And it's almost a little bit hurtful to see comments like people saying like, oh, this is obviously steroids. And you compare this physique to guys who are just as dialed, but on steroids, it's like they're twice as big. So this concept of like what is steroids and what's not steroids is blurred on both ends. I see people thinking that like clearly enhanced guys are achievable naturally. You just have to work hard enough and diet properly. But that's a little bit unrealistic. And then the same thing on the natural side, where there's guys who have amazing natural physiques, but people are like so caught in their own, I guess, just like self-deprecation that they think that even that's not possible if they trained naturally and whatever.
And you're right, because there is a really weird, almost bipolar view on it sometimes, right? Like some guy in Planet Fitness or whatever will see a guy bench 3 plates and be like, well, duh, steroids, just because it's... But then some people will then also watch World's Strongest Man and be like, oh, they're drug tested.
Yeah.
And you're like, wait a sec. The guy who's benching 3 plates around the corner from you must be on drugs. But and I mean, in no disrespect here, but the guy then who's yoke walking 900 pounds is clean. Like, if you've got an underlying assumption here, I don't understand what it is, you know. So like, it's confusing what leads to that disconnect. If you're in like those two polarized camps, like what has led to some people thinking that almost any level of athletic performance must be drug induced.
So I look at it the other way. I look at it from the person receiving the comments. Like, why do you give a fuck?
Yeah,
Oh, yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, there was a point in my younger time where I was being accused of being on steroids when I wasn't. You know, and I didn't really give a shit about the whole
kind of
thing.
a compliment,
you
really.
know,
Right.
But it wasn't.
Well,
you know, I mean, the way it was kind of presented. But I learned how to just not give a fuck. But then when I went on, it's like, see, motherfucker. You know, there's a little bit of a difference there, where that disconnect that you're talking about, I mean, you can't really control what other people are going to think.
No, I just think it's as opposed to maybe they're being concerned about the receiver, more about what leads to the creation of the opinion in the person that's saying that. Like, what have you been exposed to that makes you think a 3-plate bench is only achievable with drugs?
Yeah.
You know, because that then leads to, as Tanner has talked about, people looking at drugs as almost like a day one option when they're in the gym. Like, well, if I'm going to do anything worth doing, it requires drugs.
Yeah.
If you get what I mean, like it sets their standards and their preconceptions about what role they play differently compared to the person who looks at World's Strongest Man and goes, yeah, that's doable without.
So I think really the root cause of it is kind of internal. Like, if you have an excess optimism, then you're probably going to start assuming more on the natural side. Whereas if you have an excess pessimism and like you don't have that much hope and faith in yourself, then you're probably going to start assuming everybody else is on steroids. That's why they look better than me. We even see this with enhanced guys. I mean, like, you know how many guys have looked at someone who placed better than them at a show and is like, oh, well, they just must be taking more stuff than me.
Oh God, we
or
see
like,
that in powerlifting. And
exactly.
That's not new.
It's always that mentality of like, if I lost, it must be something wrong with the other guys. It can't be anything
more. They have access to better shit.
Right. Yeah. And so that's just like the dynamic there. You were saying something really interesting. Oh shoot, I completely forgot. I think you were talking about like just the steroid use and how people think like, you know, you're a liar and whatnot. And the mentality of like not caring is exactly what you were talking about. So what I tell guys is, because I get this question all the time, like, yo, if I hopped on cycle, like, would I put on 15 pounds? Like, if I gained 20 pounds on my first cycle, is that good? Well, good. Like, what does that matter? Like, if I told you, yeah, that's good. Okay, are you going to like do another cycle? If I told you, no, that's bad, we're going to like, oh, my genetics are bad, I shouldn't touch this stuff. Like, people will base all of their opinions on someone else, which is just crazy to me. Like
you have a crystal ball.
Right, exactly. It's like, oh, this guy knows everything. And it's like, dude, I haven't even seen your blood work. You're a random commenter in my section. I don't know anything about you. And at the end of the day, it's just like, have you hit your goal yet? If you have a certain goal in mind, you're going to do what it takes to get there. But if you haven't hit it yet, just keep going. And if you have hit it, that's awesome. You can chill out now. I don't see the overcomplication that I think guys get in their heads about like what's good and what's not good. So
the question I would have would be, what is there? I mean, I kind of know the answer, but I don't want to think it's the answer. What is the reason why they would want to jump on early? And let me elaborate a little bit. Is if you're going to be in bodybuilding or you're going to be in powerlifting or any of these strength sports, it takes time. Right. And the sooner you go on, the clock starts ticking faster. You're going to have greater longevity. If you train 5-6 years and you learn diet, nutrition, recovery, all these things before you go on. Yeah. Then when you go on, you're a little older, 26, 30, somewhere in that range. Right. And you have all that behind you, and then boom, now you're going into hyperdrive. Yeah. Where if you start super young, you kind of go into hyperdrive too soon, and then you basically, you're cutting off the back end potential of when you could be the greatest.
Yeah.
With that, if that's what the goal is.
Right.
You know, if the goal is just, I want to look good on Instagram for the next 4 years and I don't give a shit after that, then my opinion there, that doesn't even play into the whole thing. But the trick is, they go that route, then 3 years into that route, they're like, man, I really like this shit. I like to do this long term. And granted, health mitigation can change things with
prolong
that. So,
it a little bit.
I mean, you could take my whole conversation right here and say it all is without any health mitigation.
Yeah.
You know, so that may change,
Sure.
you know, with that long-term type of thing. So I'm assuming that the reason why they want to start younger is not because they're looking to be the best bodybuilder, strongman, or powerlifter.
Right. So I'll kind of tackle it from like the different perspectives that we'd see. So it is a reality that we have a lot of very, very young guys that are extremely competitive, both in the high levels of the NPC and in the high levels of the IFBB, even now. Gosh, what did we just have? Like a 20-year-old classic pro very recently. We had a 18, 19-year-olds competing in 212, like almost beating some of...
I mean, we still had that 30 years ago, though.
Exactly. And so I think now that it's getting more publicity on Instagram and whatnot, people are starting to realize like, well, he did it. Like, why can't I do that? And the difference is what they're seeing on social media is just the finished product. They're just seeing the physique. It's really rare to see the actual behind the scenes of day in, day out, what it means to push that much food. It's not, you know, some kid that's like 20 or 19 years old is getting McDonald's every weekend and then is like, no, I'm going to lock in this week and I'm going to do some training and whatever. And then they start slipping up on the weekends. Their friends are like, oh, come out, come drink with us. That's a completely different world. And so it's completely unfair for these guys to compare themselves there. But I think that's just that excess optimism. Like, if I get on, then like, oh, there's a potential that I'm going to look like him and whatever. For other guys that are looking to get on earlier, let's say like they don't have aspirations of being a bodybuilder, it could just be for their own self-confidence. Like, there's a desired physique that they want and they're impatient. And you can remember what it's like to be younger and be impatient and not really want to wait for stuff.
Well, I want to elaborate, because that's a good point that you just make, because that's a lot of the old heads like me will, you know, say that these younger kids, they're impatient. I'm like, you were too. Yeah. Like, don't fucking sit there and bullshit anybody on this. You know, it's anything that I thought was going to add 50 more pounds on a lift, and if it would happen in a month, I'm doing it. And so was everybody else that was in my generation as well. So they're fucking hypocrites. To sit there now and say, oh, these kids are impatient. It's like, motherfucker, you know, who do you think you are? Anyhow, continue.
And it's something I've talked about a ton, but that's like the other middle ground of it, where it's like people see like a desired physique on Instagram and they just want to get to it faster. I've even had guys ask me like, what kind of a cycle will get me to my peak natural potential? They don't even care about looking enhanced. They just want to look like a really good natural even faster.
How would you explain peak natural potential?
Right. So what it would look like if they had trained for, say, 10 years completely natural, they want that physique, but in like 3 years. Which is a very...
I learned something new today. Yes,
the fake natural potential.
Right. He's natural, but did he get there naturally? No. So
have you experienced any with younger people who are inquiring as well, like pressure from parents? Because I know I've seen parents actually getting in touch with people like yourself for things like growth protocols with their...
Wow, that's fucked up.
Like, can I give my son growth hormone because he's going to be 6'2", but if he's 6'4", I think he's going to get a basketball scholarship.
Continue.
I have seen this happen, and this is parents.
I would think the opposite. You know, where the parents, because that was one of the bigger problems when I was coming up, is anybody that was selling shit, like, man, it can't get into a high school, because if this gets to a parent and the parent calls the fucking cops, you're fucked.
So there's two really good points here. So for your side of the spectrum,
I've spent most of my life training in unconditioned gyms, and I know most of you that are training in garage gyms, private gyms, black iron gyms, know what I'm talking about when I say the heat sucks. It kills your motivation to go to the gym. It kills your performance, but it doesn't have to if you keep your electrolytes up. That's why today's episode is sponsored by Element. Element is a tasty electrolyte drink with everything you need and nothing you don't. This means lots of salt with none of the junk. no sugar, no colors, no artificial ingredients, no gluten, no fillers, no BS. It contains an electrolyte ratio of 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 milligrams of potassium, and 60 milligrams of magnesium. Element can help prevent and eliminate headaches, muscle cramps, fatigue, brain fog, sleeplessness, and other common symptoms associated with electrolyte deficiency. Right now, Element is offering a free sample pack with any drink mix purchase. Get yours at drinkelement.com. This deal is only available through the Table Talk link. Are you looking to boost recovery, enhance your sex drive, and improve performance in the gym? Do you think your hormones are out of whack and you're tired of getting the runaround from your doctor? You know, things like your hormones are just fine, stop lifting heavy weights, etc., etc., etc. I know what that feels like, as I've been down that road most of my life. This is why we've partnered with Mer Health. Mer Health is a premium telehealth platform that specializes in hormone optimization and preventative medicine, ensuring a better quality of life. Mer Health offers a Table Talk panel tailored for our listeners, featuring comprehensive tests like total and free testosterone, sensitive estradiol, and advanced markers like lipoprotein A and IGF-1. These comprehensive panels of up to 84 carefully selected biomarkers allow you to identify areas of enhancement and maximize your physical, cognitive, and sexual performance. It's much different than the panels you may get from your doctor. Choose between self-service options where you can select lab panels based upon decades of experience, or opt for guided optimization with your own health coach. Start with a detailed breakdown of your labs and receive personalized treatment options, both over the counter and prescription. Visit merrickhealth.com/tabletalk and use the code TABLETALK to get 10% off your first order. Mer Health isn't just about better health, it's about empowering you to take control of your well-being.
It is really interesting because biohacking is becoming diffuse. I mean, it's all over the place in this space. And it even stems, like, you can go back on like Leo and Longevity's channel, and he's talked about how if he did have a son, he would probably consider human growth hormone therapy for him. Because we do have medical evidence about people using growth hormone in kids with like idiopathic short stature, where they don't produce enough naturally. Well, that's out of necessity. What are we doing if we're doing it out of some sort of a vain desire? And also, like, does the kid even have the autonomy to make that decision? At what age are you bringing it in? So there's so many moral complications there. Took a medical ethics class in college once, and that was like one of the topics. It's like, when can you give your kid medication with or without their consent? Super weird. And then the other side of the spectrum is, what if the parents are very opposed to drug use? And I have to have these hard conversations with like teenagers that are looking to get enhanced in any way possible. Just like you've known that feeling, like, I want to put 50 pounds on my bench. I will do anything that it takes in the next month to make it happen. But it's like, dude, you live with your mom and dad. What are you going to do if they find needles in your room? Well, boom, your cycle's done. You don't get your PCT. You don't get any health mitigation, nothing, because they took all of it. Trying to explain to your parents, no, actually, mom, I need to take these injections to make these injections less dangerous. They're going to be like, no, I'm taking all your stuff away. You're done.
Well, that still kind of blows my mind, because if they're just starting and they're that age, they're going to get the fucking beginner gains anyhow.
It's not enough.
How is it not enough? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's, what, 50 pounds in 1 year is not enough? That would be a question right there, right? Because it's a beginner, it's a teenager going through puberty, right? How much more are they really going to gain if they're using any enhancements?
Sure.
Yeah. And I think they don't really see that there is a limitation. They're too much caught up in that, like, I'm invincible right now. I know that this stuff gives me dose dependent more results. Of course, you're limited.
But is it though?
Exactly.
I don't know.
But a lot of the time in those contexts, they're not looking past the first barrier, right? Like, for example, with the basketball player in the growth protocol, all that father or athlete is looking at is, in 9 months, I have a selection process that I need to win. They're not thinking like, will this cut my long-term potential short? Because if I don't get past barrier 1, barrier 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah, but if they're 13 in 9 months, they might grow fucking 7 inches.
I get it. I'm not saying it's smart. I'm
normal.
just saying, I think that's the mentality that's leading to it. Like, oh, well, my son's got, testing for, his football team tryouts or whatever. And if he doesn't put on 8 pounds, he's never getting picked. And then that's the end of the process for him,
Well, I mean, what you were saying plays more into it, because I have spoke to high school kids and to deter them away.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of the time it's, the parents are why I end up speaking to the kids, right? Is because of all that. And it's my main reason for that is if they're serious about the whole thing, the longer the wait, the more kick they're going to get on the back end. Plus what you were saying, like if your parents find out about this, it's done.
Yeah. Yeah. So like you can imagine the mindsets of these kids, and it's a similar situation where we've talked about it before, where if you're a young guy, you're hard-headed, you feel like you're indestructible. When your mom says, oh, you shouldn't do this drug, it's bad for you, they're like, F you, mom, like you don't know anything about me, whatever. Like my friends do it, it's cool. But then if you have that one kid that's like at school, he's like maybe 2 years older than you, you kind of look up to him, he's like kind of like a mentor to you. And he sits you down one day and you're like, listen, man, long term, this is not what you want to do. I've been down that path. I know what it's like. It only ends bad. That's exactly the kind of position you want to be in. Then they'll sit with it. They'll think about it. They're like, hey man, like I saw your content, like I saw your videos, I really thought about it. I looked through like this list of, I have a list on my page called like the Are You Ready for Gear checklist. And a lot of the kids will go through it and then they're like, wow, there's a lot of stuff I still don't know. And a lot of risks I'm not willing to accept right now. Thank you for making me reconsider. Like, I'm going to just take a second. I'm going to get on when I'm like, 20 something.
So what are some of the items on the list?
Yeah. So a lot of it is kind of just like Launchpad stuff to get people doing their own research, because as easy as it would be for me to just lay out all the answers for them, they're not really going to study that. It's going to stick a lot better when you go out there and you're digging through the trenches of information, trying to learn it for yourself. That's when it really sticks. So Launchpad's about like, what do you know about nephrotoxicity? Sometimes that word is like, what alien language are you speaking to me? Well, now you need to do the research. Like, how is this actually going to affect my body? Other things are much lower level. Like, do you still live with your parents or guardians? Or if you live with them, there is a huge chance that this is going to end badly for you. And sure, there's probably some parents out there where it's like they've known the enhanced route, whatever, they're okay with their kid doing this, this, and this. That's more a parenting issue. That has nothing to do with what I can say about it. But it really is just like a way of teaching them, hey, listen, if you are going to do this, you need to have a full understanding about what you're getting yourself into. In my opinion, it's just knowledge and acceptance of the risk, which if you have enough knowledge as a 16-year-old, then there's too much risk for it to be worth it for you, and you just don't do it.
No.
Do you think in many cases as well, people maybe just miss out on the opportunity of understanding how much a role maybe genetics plays into it, and also how to assess their potential before they get on? So what I mean by that is, like, for example, you can start someone as early as you want on drugs, but if they can't throw a 90-mile-an-hour fastball, they're probably never going to throw a 90-mile-an-hour fastball.
Right.
Or, when Ronnie Coleman had been training for 2 years, it was probably pretty clear he had some things going in his favor, right? So do you think that part of the process maybe gets undervalued, regardless of how much you can really gain as a newbie if you go on, but just like maybe spend a year or two getting some data so you can be like, do I really have a realistic chance of getting to any upper echelon of anything?
Oh God, I never would have fucking done that.
No, I get it, right? But like we're all here trying to talk retrospectively. Things, right?
I mean, that's one right away. I'm like, fuck no.
Yeah.
Because if you're the guy who like can't bench 225 naturally, chances are you're not going to be the 500-pound bencher when you go on gear, right? And then that change, since you're talking mitigation risk-reward ratio, well, now the risk-reward ratio is different, right? Because now you're taking the same risk as the other guy, but your upper ceiling is considerably lower. So what's the reward?
Yeah.
Well, potentially you might be taking a bigger risk.
Well, yeah, because you're probably going to take more to try and catch up.
Well, that too. Plus, the genetic side of the whole part is how you're going to be able to tolerate the drugs as well.
Yep.
And unfortunately, you're not going to know that until you
try it. Yeah.
So
the way I tackle that is definitely the first part is like, okay, so let's assess like where this individual's goal is. I think that matters a ton. Like if someone's looking at getting on enhancements as you know, I know I want to look like more than a natty, but I don't need to look like Chris Bumstead. You know, I don't need to look like Derek, right? Then okay, their expectations are more realistic. It's extremely likely that this person can get there. Extremely likely. But if your goals are like something crazy, well, then there's a problem, and we need to have that conversation. The main thing that I want to discuss with people that are considering it, and I think like a lot of people come off a little bit too aggressive on this part, is saying like, no, don't do it. Like you have no hope, you have no chances, whatever. Like Boston Lloyd was ripping on Nick Walker for the longest time, saying that he would never be anything. His genetics are so awful, like he'll never make it. And he did prove him wrong. But the metaphor I use is like approaching a kid at a park that's like throwing a football and saying like, you should just quit that. Like you're never going to be Tom Brady. And it's a little bit confusing to hear. And so I think some people like, they just love the passion of it. And if you like the day to day and you don't care about the result, then I think you might be on a better track.
Well, either way, it still comes down to the day-to-day anyhow.
Exactly. And that's what I want to emphasize in guys is like, do you love the lifestyle? Like, do you love waking up at odd hours of the night and doing injections and then going back to sleep? Like, if you're really about that, then, you know, I can't say anything to you. You actually are a crazy person. You love the lifestyle. But if you just love the idea of being like, you know, 225 shredded at the beach, like looking sick, girls are coming up to you, you're in it for the wrong reasons. And so the genetics don't even play a part of that. It's just like a willingness to play the game. So then the other side of the equation is like genetics, like resistance to the issues. I like to talk about guys being hyper responders in two different ways. Like some people are just so sensitive to the drugs, for better or worse. Sometimes they will be super sensitive to side effects. Like you'll see gyno flare up on super low doses, but these guys are freaks. They put on so much muscle. The other side of it is like they can tank doses like an elephant, and you'd be surprised. Like look at these guys' livers when they're doing like 3-digit oral doses and they're completely healthy. Mind-boggling. But
so what are some of the mechanisms you think that kind of make that difference? You know, so you take person A and person B, hyper and hypo.
Yeah.
Responder. What are some of the things that go on under the hood, do you think, that lead to that?
Well, I mean, geez, I think if we knew, we'd be able to start mimicking it a little bit. But I don't know if we're quite there. So we can really just boil it down to, and it feels like a cop-out answer, but we're like, oh, genetic polymorphisms. So we can just boil it down to genetics. But it's kind of like a Punnett square, where it's like there's two possibilities on both ends, where it's like, okay, first of all, the anabolism side, how much muscle mass am I going to put on? Hyper or hypo? The safety side, how resistant am I to side effects? Hyper or hypo? There is the worst possible scenario 25% of the time, you know, roughly, where it's like you don't grow at all and your body is dying and begging for help. Then there's the best possible scenario. You are built like a tank and you grow like a monster. Guys got to realize that you're going to fall somewhere in that spectrum, and you got to have a plan for what you're going to do depending on where you land in that spectrum. Because you sure as hell better know how to keep yourself healthy if you're dealing with the my body can barely handle this stuff, it's crying for help situation.
Sure.
How would they know that if it's their first cycle? Because that's you're gonna think that you are the hypo, you know, the responder with, well, the side effects could be there, you know, for sure. But there's nothing like the first cycle. Right?
Yeah. So it's just blood work. And it's so amazing that all of the guys above me, all of my mentors have started to emphasize that. Yeah. Of course, there's now more private blood work companies that are becoming available. I work with one, and just making it accessible to guys and saying like, hey, listen, before you do your cycle, you should probably understand what your natural baseline is like. Are you predisposed to high red blood cell count? Are you predisposed to high cholesterol? Like, does it run in your family? You should know all of these things so that when you get on cycle, you can anticipate, okay, I'm probably going to have issues here, here, and here. This is, of course, just an educated guess. We don't even know until we get on the steroids, and then we see what happens.
Now, are they willing to actually get the blood work done before they go on?
Depends on the price. Because a lot of guys, especially as they're younger, you can imagine what it's like to be a broke college kid. You're looking at the steroids, you're like, oh, look at this vial. It's like, you know, $30-$40. Like, I could do that. And then someone's like, wait, you have to get blood work. And you look at the price tag, you're like, it's $500, $800? I can't do that. I'm just going to, you know, I'll be fine. I'm not going to do it. So, you know, if there's any possibility to start making blood work more and more affordable, that's going to be the shoe in there. And a lot of guys can't go through insurance because their parents, they're on their same, you know, insurance as their parents. They're going to see like, why'd you pull blood work at this time? Like, what's that about?
Yeah. I mean, the way I'm kind of looking at that is it's the best baseline you'll ever have.
Yes.
Right.
So the most important one you can ever get.
Exactly.
So you can't skimp on it. You can't get a cheap panel as a natural. You do need to go all in because you're never going to be natural again.
Sure. With so like we mentioned about hypo and hypers, but like one of the few things we do know at least is like, you know, people metabolize and cleave drugs in different ways, right? Like people assume like DECA goes in the needle, goes in the blood, stays as DECA and does magical DECA things in the body, right? When really it gets,
if only.
yeah, it gets cut up into like, there's like 7 or 8.
Wait, you mean it doesn't work like that?
Yeah.
It rides this magic unicorn through the bloodstream into the muscle cells. So like, you know, some of those, you know, where you're mentioning about maybe some people get all the sides, some people get all the benefits, is maybe related to like which variations
the
you
metabolites,
end up. But do you think that's where people not copying cycles and actually properly experimenting in the correct way with different drugs, different esters, and all that type of thing comes into play? Because, you know, you might be one of those worst possible scenario responders to DECA.
Yeah.
But then, for all you know, Masteron, you could fall on the other end of the spectrum and be someone who blows up on that because you metabolize the better versions or whatever we want to say.
Yeah.
So, do you think that, you know, more needs to be done in terms of people methodically kind of working through drugs to find that happy medium? Because sure, you do one cycle and you get X results, but there's, you know, that's not all you're left with at the end of the day.
Yeah. So it's perfect that you bring that up.
Well, let me add to that too.
Yes.
If there is a protocol to be able to do that, what's that look like? You know, like you changing drugs every week.
Right. So,
you know?
And that's what I was just about to talk about. So kind of like my philosophy, how I approach cycle design. Let's say for like a beginner, he is 26 years old. He's been training for 5 years and he wants to go the enhanced route. Definitely, I would start with just testosterone because at baseline, every male body is encoded to process testosterone. I'm a little bit skeptical when people say like, "Oh, I'm a bad responder to testosterone." It's like, bro, you already make it. Like, how are you not miserable naturally? So, you know, there's
naturally miserable.
Yeah, actually, you're miserable when it's low.
Right, most likely. So, you know, there's definitely people who will metabolize it in different ways. Like maybe they're super sensitive to that extra DHT, super sensitive to that extra estradiol. Or estradiol. Some people make fun of me for the way I pronounce it. But either of those two things, once we get that handled, we have a balance there, then obviously we start trying new compounds. So typically the compounds that I'll be rotating in and out is kind of like about 4 that I'll float between, and that would be Masteron, Primobolan, Nandrolone, and Equipoise. So if we are going to test a compound, I want to start with the shortest acting ester of it first. That way, if we're encountering any issues, we can remove it and then get those mental side effects, physical side effects removed as fast as possible. So like NPP over DECA, for example. Of course, some people will feel different on DECA versus NPP, but at least we can get an educated guess by starting with the shorter one and then bringing in that longer one a little bit later. So instead of Equipoise, boldenone cypionate, and actually boldenone acetate has also been kind of floating around lately. We can start guys on that and then see how they respond and then try Equipoise later if they kind of liked it and they want to go more long-term with it. So we start with just low experimentation phases of all of these drugs. We're not really pushing doses until we have an idea of, okay, it looks like your miracle cycle is somewhere in this range. Like you feel best on this drug and your blood markers are best on this drug, in which case we can probably push that for...
How would you define feel best?
Right. And that's subjective to the individual.
Right. Because I can understand if you see side effects.
Yeah.
Right. That's obvious.
Yeah.
But the feel best is like, what's that?
Yeah. Some guys will get mental feelings on drugs, and I know some guys who don't. Like Boston Lloyd is a really weird example where he says he's never felt his steroids. So he's done like all the halo testing in the world and whatever, and just like never felt an ounce of anger, never felt agitated or amped up at all.
Taking benzos too.
Well, yeah, everything else that he's done. So there's people who are more or less sensitive to the neurological side of things. And for guys who are super sensitive, they might experience like mood swings, everything. And I check their estrogen, they're totally in range. And it could just be like a negative response to something like Nandrolone. Like I've seen that happen a lot where there's a lot of mental distortions with people who are using Nandrolone. And so you just want to have guys that are on a cycle that makes them feel good, delivers good results, and they're healthy on it. And
well, I guess what I was asking more about is how are the results defined? Because if the training sucks and the nutrition sucks, it doesn't matter if it's a great compound, they feel great, but they're not making progress because their training's horseshit.
Yeah, and that's the assumption. So assuming that all of these things are locked in, then we're assessing things like that. And of course, if they're having a moment where they're traveling a bunch and they're slacking on the gym, then we have to consider that as far as our assessment of XYZ cycle, right?
For you then, with the short esters as well, does that allow you a shorter experimentation window?
Yeah.
So like, say you were testing EQ you're going to probably need to do it for 4 or 6 weeks or whatever before it really anything is happening for you to know. Whereas if you're using those short esters, how short can those experimentation phases be in some circumstances?
Yeah, so typically it's going to be limited by their budget for blood work as well. I mean, like, you know, if you have the resources to get a very extensive panel done every 2 weeks, we could definitely do a rotation that's pretty quick like that. But of course, it also depends on the ester of the compound. Like boldenone cypionate, we're talking about like 7-ish day half-life. And so in that case, we're probably going to need to let them saturate on it for about like a month or so, and then get some blood work done versus like, you know, NPP, or if you're just like trying a master on, you know, drostanolone propionate, then that's a situation where it's like, yeah, you could do probably a week or two and see how you feel on that and what you're noticing. But of course, like assessing physique development is much longer. You're not going to notice like, oh, wow, I put on tons of muscle on, you know, propionate where it's been like 2 weeks, you know, how much muscle can you even put on in that
I suppose the premise there is going to be, if the drug doesn't give you side effects to a meaningful degree, if you feel good on it, then you can probably take more of it for longer and train hard and so on and so forth.
That's kind of the starting point is like, I've seen coaches do this where they'll give their clients cycles where they know full well that their client is miserable, like they feel awful. And I'm not talking in prep context. I'm talking like off season, whatever. It's destroying their relationships, whatever, but it's delivering the results, and that's all they care about. I just could never be that person for my clients. And so I have to find something that's like, they're happy on it, you know, their dick works and all of these other good things. And then, you know, we go from there.
So that's having the communications for that, because I would have been that person.
Yeah.
Right. Where I did not give a fuck what I felt like as long as the results in the gym were there.
Yeah.
And I'm not telling anybody. Well, I didn't have anybody really advising either, but I wouldn't be working with a coach. You know, if I'm making gains in the gym that are good, and they're like, you know, my dick isn't working, and they're like, hey, is your dick working? Yeah, it's fine. Like, I am not fucking changing anything, because you see what I'm saying? So it's, how do you navigate that type of individual?
And that's why you just cater your programs to the risk level of the individual, because some people are willing to risk a lot. I mean, like, they're all in. They're like, dude, just kill me. Like, I will do it. I want to, you know, get the results, whatever. I'm not going to kill them. I'm going to keep them alive as much as I can. But like, they're basically just saying like, I want to push harder. And it's like, yeah, we can make some room for that, but I don't want any deaths on my record, so I'm not going to push you that hard. Whereas other guys, it's like, no, like, I don't want any side effects. Like, I don't want my hair to fall out, whatever. It's like, yeah, then obviously our budget for dosing is going to be a lot smaller. It's just catering your plan to the client, and then obviously the response of their body. If we're seeing something on blood work, it's like, hey, listen, man, I know you love this oral, but it's probably going to have to go. Something like that.
What are some of the typical things you'll see on the blood work first? Granted, I know everybody's different, but there's going to be, you know, some commonalities.
You know, one of the weirdest things I've seen out of the newer generation is that there's a disproportionate level of estrogen compared to testosterone almost across the board. So a lot of guys seem to just be higher and higher and higher aromatizers. And this is like accounting for obesity. You know, I'm not always working with guys that are overweight. Even the skinny guys, they just have naturally low testosterone levels, naturally high estrogen levels. And we can go on a whole tangent about like, you know, could this potentially be, you know, microplastics or other
the deep state,
endocrine disrupt. Well, yeah, I don't know.
The globalists,
right? The secret agents are putting stuff in the water. Yeah, whatever it is. I mean, it's a little bit concerning to see. But at least like once we start bringing in the synthetics, it seems like their bodies start to churn out estrogen at more normal rates, whereas the endogenous production is a little bit weird, a little bit wonky.
Interesting.
Yeah. Of course, I only have my sample size, but it's still weird to see.
Just going back to like, say you've got a 21-year-old Dave as a client, God help you. How important would you say it is to maybe advise someone like that who's very driven to have someone close who's like a mediator? So like, if I ask Dave, how are you feeling? If his bench is going up, he's going to say, I feel fucking great, right? Even if he's sleeping 2 hours a night and whatever. Yeah. So like, how important do you think it is, you know, maybe it's their partner or their training partner, a good friend or whatever. Do you think it's important to have someone who can maybe just check your bullshit when you're doing these types of things, to be like, actually, you need to tell your coach because you're a fucking nightmare to be
well, I would say, now. I mean, it's being that person.
Yeah.
I would say that would be highly important. I'm not saying that because I didn't have access to that, so I can't hypothetically go back and think of what I would have done. Yeah. You know, I would like to think that probably would have been good, you know, to have some. Now, if there was somebody then to be able to tell me how to make the shit work better, I would have listened.
Yeah.
Right? Because back then it was just, it's not working, it's either fake, so you got to up the dose or whatever it is. It's a whole different world, the way things were at that point in time. But the whole thing that would go through, and it wasn't just me, it was a lot of us, is, all we're just pounding tests, DECA, D-ball and shit like that is, there's got to be a better way, to actually structure this shit out. So we're not just pounding the same shit, all the time, and then meet's over, go on equipoise and stay away from the other shit, and then bounce. There's half-lives. I understood that. There's half-life. They all work through different mechanisms. And there was nobody, if there was somebody like that, most definitely, I would have been, that would have opened that channel.
Yeah.
Because I think if you say you had like a questionnaire for your clients, right? Like, how would you rate your mood, your workout performance, how agitated you are, your sleep? If you gave it to the actual person and then maybe like their wife or whatever, and they had to rate the same
but they
things.
wouldn't care that.
No, I get that.
At that age, it's not a wife, it's a girlfriend.
Yeah, sure.
Right. And the training is more important. So it's like, fuck it. If she can't handle it, I'll find another one.
Yeah.
That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
Your perception of side effects and what's okay is, does it get to the point where with some people you actually just can't trust their answers?
Right. And so
I get it. Yeah.
So instead of relying on that survey, basically what I do is I give them like a cheat sheet of solutions, because I know guys that, like, even though it's totally confidential with me, a lot of guys are sharing more information than I need, but other guys don't share that much. And I know that there's probably some problems going on under the hood, but maybe it's an ego thing, maybe it's a confidence thing. They're just like, I can't tell him that I'm having this. Like, he built this whole cycle for me, whatever. Instead, what I'll do is I'll basically just give them the solution and not ask if they have a problem, but they'll see what it looks like, and they're like, oh, I can go take this and I can still make all the gains I'm making, but without these side effects. Yeah, I'm going to go try that. And then maybe he'll come back on a future call and say, hey, so I did this thing off of the cheat sheet, whatever, and I'm getting some results, but it's not as good as I wanted. Like, can we dial this in? And then the conversation is opened. What I'll typically notice is that
I would have done.
Guys need to start internally. Guys like to like discover something for themselves. They don't like to be told things that much.
It's like Inception.
Right, exactly. So if 21-year-old Dave is having some Johnson problems and discovers for himself that he could take this drug to fix it, and it's not me saying, oh, well, your wiener doesn't work, so you need to use this, then he's going to feel a lot more like he has that autonomy, like he made that choice for himself. And then he can have a conversation and say, like, yeah, I tried this. Did it work? Did it not work? We can try something else instead. And that way my clients just tend to open up a little bit more to me, because if I have like a survey thing, then it creates this culture of like, are you lying to me? Like, are you telling me everything? Are you giving me the full story here? Whatever. Like, well, I don't really trust you, so I need to go talk to your wife. Like, give me your girlfriend's number.
Sure.
Give me. It creates a weird dynamic, and so instead, I just like I give them the power themselves.
Do you think some people just think that you don't need that information, like it's not relevant, or that maybe you don't want to hear it?
Yeah. I mean, I tell guys all the time, like, I basically will start, if we're getting to that topic, I'll start with a funny story about, like, a client of mine who described in a little bit too much detail what his sex life is like. And I'll say, like, dude, I've heard it all. Like, don't worry about it. It's totally normal. It's like, my nipples are weird. Like, why are they leaking liquid and stuff? It's a weird topic. You don't really talk about that, like, with your buddies and stuff.
When you're dealing with these types of things with people, like, it's almost like kind of a doctor-style relationship. Like, nothing is really off the table in terms of being relevant or needed, right? Like, yeah, you're going to have to, and I'm sure, like, trying to get to that level with someone remotely in terms of a relationship, it's probably difficult at times,
super
right?
weird. Yeah. But they come around to it where it's like, yeah, like, I can be comfortable with him because he can fix this problem that I'm having.
Sure.
Now, once they become acclimated, to whatever that cycle is, then how do you go about mitigating the changes for that?
Yeah, so blood work is definitely a great place to start.
Yeah.
And then obviously outside of that, just checking the blood pressure, getting a glucometer and staying on top of that. And the way that I'll approach every cycle design is basically just like making sure that guys understand like what needle movers are going to change longevity the most without affecting your progress. Like, controlling your cholesterol is not going to make you 10 times weaker in the gym. Controlling your blood pressure is not going to make you that much weaker in the gym. All of these things where once guys start to understand
that much, you see what I'm saying? Like,
right.
If that were me, going back,
I have to choose my words carefully with you,
right there, that would have been like, fuck it, no.
Yeah, exactly. So, and that's like, you know, a controversial topic about like guys like Dallas taking EPO before they worked out. And it's like, my coach offhandedly made a remark one time and was like, yeah, high blood pressure is the best pre-workout, which we definitely should not repeat. But, you know, you leave all that stuff aside and you basically just help guys realize, like, listen, if there is going to be a period of time where you want that blood pressure to be high, that's totally fine. Like, that's your growing phase, make it happen. But there also then needs to be a time out of the year where it's not that high. You can't sustain, you know, crazy numbers all day long. So just like outlining for guys, like, okay, cholesterol needs to be controlled, blood pressure needs to be controlled. When we look at your blood work, like, is your liver healthy? Is your kidney healthy? Is there anything we can do to just like help that? What's your, you know, what's your CBC looking like? How's that panel looking? Is there anything we need to bring in there to get that healthier? Is donating blood a consideration for you? All of these things. And then once you just like go through this checklist with guys, usually it's only like, you know, 1 or 2 things that end up being problem markers, and everything else, they just have like some pretty good genetics to be resistant on that side. Then we have a happy and healthy client that's continuing to make results and they're satisfied. So, and they are going to live probably an extra 20 years than they would have, or 10, you know.
In the context of those individuals then who start getting results, and as we are hardwired as humans, obviously always assuming more is better, how do you go about explaining the idea of diminishing returns in this? So, you know, like, oh, I'm taking 400 tests and gaining at X rate, 800 must be awesome.
Right.
Like, so like, you know, whether it's at the biological level or just, you know, whatever, however you want to explain it, how do you get that message across that, like, no, there's going to be a sweet spot where you start, every milligram is going to give you less and less, but potentially more size. So whatever.
I like explaining it to guys in terms of like any kind of metaphor that I can think of. So having a motorcycle and racing it on the highway is probably one of the best examples, where it's like, it's really fun to cruise on your motorcycle. You feel good. You're safe. You know, nothing bad's going to happen to you. And if you're really safe, you're wearing your helmet. You know, you've got your full suit on, whatever. It's really fun to go really fast. And you're like, well, if I've gone 60, what if I went 160? If I've gone 160, what if I go 260? But the second something goes wrong, something goes really wrong. And you start to explain that ratio of benefits to risks. And the more you push that dosage up, the more that ratio is getting skewed. So the benefits are going down, diminishing returns, and the risks are going up. You're just dramatically increasing the amount of side effects that you're experiencing, as far as like cosmetic side effects like acne, hair loss, etc. Your organs are starting to be stressed out even more. And guys will start to pick a sweet spot for themselves where they're like, this is where I feel comfortable. And at a certain point, it's like, you have to realize that potentially your androgen receptors are fully saturated. Like, if you injected more testosterone into your body, it would do 0.000001%. It wouldn't even put a 2.5 pound plate on any of your lifts. And then I think at that point, guys are like, okay, so even if I went that far, is it worth the side effects that I would be getting? And the answer is, like, if your career ended next year, is it worth it? Well, no. Like, I want to compete for another 5 years or another 10 years, whatever. It's like, okay, then if that's your goal, your doses cannot go higher than this, because I've seen your blood work. I know what it's going to look like if you do this. Sure.
So at the, you know, the physiological level, then, if we removed all the side effects that say they don't exist, is it the receptor saturation that is going to lead to hitting that upper ceiling of benefits? Because there is some individuals will say that doesn't happen, and that testosterone will stimulate more androgen receptors to be created, so therefore that domino effect means that never happens. Right? I'm not saying that's correct or incorrect, but in your opinion, is that what kind of makes that upper ceiling hit, provided they're not hitting side effects first?
Yeah, I think it does get a little wiggly. I think, like, and this is kind of the way that I approach a lot of my cycle designs, is that just hammering on androgens is kind of a blind way to do it. Like, the amount of benefits that you would get out of just adding injectable L-carnitine on top of your injectable testosterone is dramatic in a way that doesn't really increase your risk at all, but you're now getting way more bang for your buck out of your testosterone. So it's like a no-brainer. Even if there's some guy that's like obsessed with results and will do anything, you'll start to talk to these guys. It's almost like they have death wishes. They don't really want to get better. They actually just kind of want to kill themselves with steroids. And so you have to make the distinction. It's like, I'm giving you a safer option that will give you equivalent results. Why are you not taking it? So that's kind of a separate conversation. But as far as like actually the testosterone, the interplay with the androgen receptor, all of that, I think that at a certain point there is diminishing returns, and we've seen it in person. Like, you know, we can see some of the biggest guys that have ever done it. We've seen all the, you know, not even talking like 4 digits a week. We're talking like 5 digits a week of total steroids. Very rare cases, we've seen it. Have these guys won the Olympia? Not that I know of. And, you know, you have to find that sweet spot for yourself.
Well, and that was a question with the motorcycle example is there, with these guys that you're talking about, is there a finish line? Right. So a show, a meet or something like that, because if I'm on that motorcycle, right, and then there's that meet, and, you know, depending upon the time, I'll go fucking 200 miles an hour, helmet off. But I know it's here. This is when it slows down. Yeah. Right. So if everything's good, I don't need to go faster. Yeah. Because I'm on pace. Right. I'm not on pace, and we're gonna hammer it down. But I know here, you know, it stops. Right. But if they're not training for anything, right, then it's just for Instagram or whatever it's going to be. Are you trying to have them have that peak, I guess, is what I'm looking for? You need to develop that long-term thinking in these guys, especially if like it is an Instagram thing. People are starting to become more and more aware that your time in the limelight on Instagram, if it is based on your physique, that's limited. And unless you are like a professional bodybuilder and you have a reputation, you have respect in the sport, and, you know, people are paying attention to you and what you do, that's more there's much more longevity there. But if you're just like a social media guy, some people will find you, look up to you, like, wow, I want to look like this guy. And then over time, you're like, he kind of just looks the same. I guess he's gotten bigger. It's hard to tell. Then there's something new and shiny that's on the other end of the spectrum. So like Sam Sulek was super popular for a while, got tons of attention, has definitely had his time in the limelight, and is starting to kind of fade out now. His views on YouTube are not as prolific as they used to be. So just pacing it for guys, essentially. And then for the motorcycle example, I think bringing genetics into it, it's a good way to look at what motorcycle are you even riding? Like, do you have a complete junker? And no matter how hard you crank that gas, you're not going to go that fast. So that's the diminishing return. You keep adding milligrams, you're still the same speed. But if you have a top of the line bike, when you crank on that, you will go a lot faster. You will go a lot farther than other people. You will make it to the finish line faster than everyone else. Whereas the other guy is like, I'm adding more gas. Like, why am I not, why don't I look like him? Congratulations, you figured it out. So pick the wrong parents. In that analogy, other than genetics, how do we upgrade the quality of the bike? I think if gas is the androgens, there's so many other things that we can bring in, like besides the androgens, to just like make that process as streamlined as possible. So, it's like aftermarket mods. We can't swap out the engine on the bike, unfortunately, but I think what we can do is basically just like enhance every little bit of it that we can. So like injectable L-carnitine is a great example. And then all the way to the top, you have to... Now, why would that be a great example? Yeah, so one of the main benefits of injectable L-carnitine is increasing androgen receptor clearance. So you can imagine with an androgen receptor, you have an androgen, floats over to it, binds to it, sits there, exerts its effects, and then pops out and goes and does something else. So the speed at which that happens, of course, if you get more binding instances in the same amount of time, well, now you have overall greater androgen expression in your body, and therefore more bang for your buck, but you've been injecting the same amount of testosterone. So the side effects are the same, but now you're getting a little bit more results. I have had some people wondering if injectable L-carnitine would actually increase the side effects because it's overall androgen signaling, and we would imagine that we would see that. But it's been interesting because I haven't noticed it in my clients yet. So I'm waiting to see when that does happen. But that's one example, the injectable L-carnitine. I think injury prevention is a huge topic that guys don't consider. If you're looking to be any sort of athlete, bodybuilder, whatever, if you get injured, your career is immediately in jeopardy. So using something like BPC 157, TB 500, that's basically doing the maintenance on the bike to make sure it doesn't break down on you at some point. Because if you break down, you're sitting on the side of the road, you're losing time, whatever. And then eventually, once it's fixed up, then you can start hitting the road again. If you never have an issue, you can keep pushing on steady. Whereas like there could be guys with insane genetics, but they break something like every other year. They're never going to make it.
So like, I mean, this is a good rabbit hole to go down now, because this is essentially for those who don't want to take the steroid route. What are the other options, right? And then we get into the whole world of peptide SARMs and everything in between.
Well, what's a fucking whatever? I'm going to shut up.
No, but this becomes a question now, though, because with...
It shouldn't be, though. It's like, what's the fucking point? Like, if you're going to... Whatever.
I know. And you'll have an input on this, I hope. Yeah. With all the peptides that, because there seems to be a new one every month, right? Yeah. And at some point, there's going to be a peptide that enhances probably just about every signaling system in the body. And there's going to be SARMs that do similar things. At what point is natty? So I just want to ask that first before we dive down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, I've loved this question. So I've seen so many people say, oh, well, the World Anti-Doping Association, that's the natty standard. Or like, no, it's the this particular bodybuilding competition that's natty, like that's the standard. Whatever the standard is, my standard is go up to the biggest guy in the gym, tell him, hey, bro, I just started my first cycle. He says, oh, cool, what do you want? If you tell him what you're using and he laughs at you, you are natural. Like you imagine some kid comes up to Dave and is like, "Hey man, I just started my first cycle." Like, oh, what are you on? Rad 140.
And glutathione.
Glutathione. I'm using some peptides. You're like, okay, come back later. Try again. That's the standard. And imagine any compound, anything that you could possibly think of. What would the biggest guy say? He would laugh at you.
I mean, that pretty much kills that question dead in the water, and that's very well played. Because, the argument would be like, oh, well, whatever, body creates it anyway. Well, then so is testosterone. And, if it's a case of passing a drug test, then we can all take GH and insulin till the cows come home and we're all natty as well. Right? Like, so.
Well, if we turn this back a little bit, would that be what those high school kids are going to try to use to justify with their parents because it's not steroids?
Yeah. So that's the thing, is that a lot of kids in, high school or people who live with their parents, whatever their situation is, if they're living at home, they can't have needles. So they know that by default can't do that. Well, what can they do? Oh, well, SARMs come in these little liquid bottles. Well, I mean, if only you could explain to the parents that like probably injecting testosterone might be safer than using a SARM, but they're never going to get that. And so what you have to do is say, okay, let's take this person who has established that their restrictions are, I can't inject anything, but I really want more gains. Like, you got to give me something. Come on, bro. All right. Here's what we would do. The most popular things that have been coming out right now is enclomiphene and MK677. So enclomiphene, selective estrogen receptor modulator, basically just going to trick the brain to, make it think that it doesn't have enough estrogen. And as a consequence, more gonadotropins, more testosterone. So it will increase natural testosterone production. I've seen pretty significant results with it. I've seen pretty mild results with it. So some guys, they'll maybe get from like 300 to 800 total testosterone. I've seen crazy numbers at like 1600 total testosterone just from enclomiphene. There are concerns about like, does it potentially lower IGF-1 in the people who are using it? That's a consideration. And then the MK677, ghrelin mimetic, it's just going to help increase a little bit more growth hormone. So what the individual is getting is more testosterone, more growth hormone. Is it on par with actually injecting test and actually injecting growth hormone? It's not, but of course it's probably the closest thing we have to getting those things without injections.
Sure. Do you think that in the case of a lot of these SARMs, like some people will say they're safer, for example, but if you were to, if we looked at it maybe on a milligram per milligram dose, it is safer. Right, like you take, but if you were to take the dosage of whatever SARM to mimic the actual results of 100 milligrams of testosterone, do you still think it would be safer? If you understand, like, if we look at it in terms of how much do I need to take to get X result, is it still really safer?
Exactly.
Or am I just accepting less results?
I mean, I think the biggest issue is that guys need to realize that the SARMs will shut down their natural testosterone production. And there's a myriad of issues that will come with that. So if you're just, willy-nilly, some dude at, your high school gym is like, oh, I've been taking this stuff and I've been so much stronger, bro. Like, you got to hop on this. They don't know anything. There's no education there. But if they've done the research and they've looked at these things and they've understood the risk factor of them, well, then the conclusion that they should logically come to is like, why would I sacrifice my natural testosterone, which is like, I'm in the heyday of my life. I'm going through puberty. My body is juicing out as much testosterone as I will probably ever juice out, slowly being turned from a man to a boy. Why would I just sacrifice all of that for a synthetic that arguably is not going to deliver the exact identical properties of testosterone? And I've seen so many mood distortions. I've seen so many erectile dysfunction cases with guys that have been using SARMs. And I've had a lot of guys just coming to me like, yeah, I did SARMs in high school. Like, help me, please. Sure. And the only thing I have to tell them is like, dude, I'm sorry. I know you didn't sign up for this, but you're probably going to be on TRT for life. And they're like, well, what? I just want to take a little oral thing and get a boost. So it's like, well, buckle up, buddy. You better get comfortable with needles. You're going to know them for a long time now.
What are the most common culprits you're seeing with people who are having those types of problems?
It's just all SARMs in general. Okay. And the issue is that I've seen a lot of content being pushed that's like, oh, this SARM's not suppressive. Like, this one's not going to shut you down. But I've, again, seen the same exact cases with these people taking this stuff. So if it is a SARM, just by definition, the way it works and the way your body's going to detect it, your testosterone levels will go down. Just how it regulates. So, okay. I'm not optimistic about any of them. And also, it doesn't help that there's a profit incentive behind SARMs. You rarely see people promoting SARMs if they don't make a buck off of them.
Sure. So if we're looking at people who don't want to go down the steroid route now, then let's just take, Joe Blogs, dad of two, full-time job, whatever. You've mentioned L-carnitine as a way of, should we say, making more of whatever testosterone you have.
Making the most of it.
Yeah. Like getting a better response from it, right? What else is in the peptide world now that you see having kind of larger scale applications? And, maybe we're not even just talking training here.
Yeah, so the way that I look at the entire peptide space, and this is a belief of mine, is that everyone is going to be enhanced at some point. And that enhancement isn't necessarily going to...
I've spent most of my life training in unconditioned gyms, and I know most of you that are training in garage gyms, private gyms, black iron gyms, know what I'm talking about when I say the heat sucks. It kills your motivation to go to the gym, it kills your performance, but it doesn't have to if you keep your electrolytes up. That's why today's episode is sponsored by Element. Element is a tasty electrolyte drink with everything you need and nothing you don't. This means lots of salt with none of the junk. No sugar, no colors, no artificial ingredients, no gluten, no fillers, no BS. It contains an electrolyte ratio of 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 milligrams of potassium, and 60 milligrams of magnesium. Element can help prevent and eliminate headaches, muscle cramps, fatigue, brain fog, sleeplessness, and other common symptoms associated with electrolyte deficiency. Right now, Element is offering a free sample pack with any drink mix purchase. Get yours at drinkelement.com. This deal is only available through the Table Talk link. Are you looking to boost recovery, enhance your sex drive, and improve performance in the gym? Do you think your hormones are out of whack and you're tired of getting the runaround from your doctor? Things like your hormones are just fine, stop lifting heavy weights, etc., etc., etc. I know what that feels like, as I've been down that road most of my life. This is why we've partnered with Mer Health. Mer Health is a premium telehealth platform that specializes in hormone optimization and preventative medicine, ensuring a better quality of life. Mer Health offers a Table Talk panel tailored for our listeners, featuring comprehensive tests like total and free testosterone, sensitive estradiol, and advanced markers like lipoprotein A and IGF-1. These comprehensive panels of up to 84 carefully selected biomarkers allow you to identify areas of enhancement and maximize your physical, cognitive, and sexual performance. It's much different than the panels you may get from your doctor. Choose between self-service options where you can select lab panels based upon decades of experience, or opt for guided optimization with your own health coach. Start with a detailed breakdown of your labs and receive personalized treatment options, both over-the-counter and prescription. Visit merrickhealth.com/tabletalk and use the code TABLETALK to get 10% off your first order. Mer Health isn't just about better health, it's about empowering you to take control of your well-being.
Be like we're all blasting gear and we're all getting huge and stuff. It's more like people have low-level day-to-day problems and they hate it. It's like, I suffer from insomnia. You could try, Delta sleep-inducing peptide. Or it's like, my back's just been aching, it's been killing me, whatever. If you start trying BPC 157, I've seen a ton of cases where guys just get better. And their, nagging aches and injuries and whatever from their years of football or whatever sport they played or their lifting, it all kind of starts to go away. So really what we're just looking to do is just improve the quality of the individual's life depending on their goals. And so there could be someone who's natural and is like, I want to build as much muscle as possible. That's a very different peptide stack than Joe Schmo, who's like, my back hurts sometimes and sometimes my wiener doesn't work. Like, do you have anything for me? It's like, yeah, I could probably give you some tadalafil and BPC 157 and you'll be a happy camper. So.
Sure. So if I'm wanting to get as big and strong as possible, I assume L-carnitine would be in there straight away, but maybe what else would be there?
Yeah. One of the things I'm probably the most disappointed about as far as the peptide world is that strength, the peptides that could be increasing strength, I've been really not optimistic about the results that they've delivered. It seems like the only thing that will really crank strength numbers is, besides genetics, is just the steroids. So on the peptide side of things, we're looking at, anything that will increase growth hormone, anything that will increase testosterone, anything that will minimize injuries, and then anything that will make more bang for your buck out of the stuff that your body's already doing. So also considering like energetics, like, are you using something like MOTS-C to improve your mitochondrial efficiency? So that's also a consideration. So what you do is you end up just like moving the needle slightly on like, say, 10, 12 different markers. And the net result you get out of that is as if you added like one big compound. And so there are naturals who, like, if they're going the full half natty route, they might be able to, half natty, right?
Yeah.
You might be able to discover like, okay, like I'm getting the equivalent results of a man who's on like a moderate dosage of Western medical TRT.
Sure. So you mentioned
the rant, right?
Yeah.
So they would choose to pin themselves multiple times per fucking day.
Yeah.
Instead of just once.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Depends on how much they value having natural testosterone levels. I think that's what it boils down to. If they never want to do TRT, I get it, but
yeah, okay, whatever.
Hey, look, man, I'm enhanced too, so we're on the same team.
You mentioned the disappointing results in terms of strength.
Yeah.
So I presume that you're talking like short-term absolute max strength, etc. But what about, say, for example, if you had much success with like neurological based peptides, maybe for increasing technical efficiency,
that
motor learning, so then we're going on to things like CELANC, CEMAX, alpha GPC, new pep, and stuff like that. Do you think that side maybe doesn't get looked at enough in strength sports? Where like mastery and motor control, motor skill acquisition, etc.
So I think it's probably just because of my client base, but I've had more of a association of those compounds with like performance sports or like performance activities. So like I've worked with professional, not like super high level, but race car drivers. And so any sort of sport or activity where decision making is super important, having those neurological peptides in play that you can increase the speed at which you make decisions is just major. And that also will translate into like learning and skill acquisition. And so I think probably in a powerlifting sense, there is potential for it. It might be a little bit difficult for guys who like are more stuck in their ways and like they're just expecting to take it and get stronger. Whereas if you're doing it with the deliberate intent to say shape up your form on something or develop a new technique, then absolutely, I think there's huge potential there. Sure. But is it under leveraged?
Yeah. I mean, but let's take that same example though, same drug and new context, Joe Blogg's father of two starting a new job.
Yeah.
First 6 weeks of the new job, right? Here's all these new tasks you need to learn.
Yeah.
Obviously, very little is as stressful as starting a new job with all the new things. So like CELANC, CEMAX, and all those types of things there. Do you see things like that being used just to improve like life quality, for example, for individuals?
I made a video about it where I said that the corporate world is not a drug tested sport. And I want people to realize, like, I was initially born in California and I've lived in the Bay Area. I know like the whole Silicon Valley scene. If you want to get ahead and the dude in the cubicle next to you is just like running on a cup of coffee and you're running on 6 peptides and some, hormone replacement therapy, you are playing a completely different ballgame. And he doesn't even know that game exists. And the metaphor that I've heard is that like a deer and a hunter, where it's the deer doesn't even know that he's playing the game. That's the best part about it, because the hunter will always win. And so if everyone around you like doesn't even realize this stuff exists, like, they've never experimented with it, whatever, well, all of a sudden they're like, how's that guy so sharp? Like, how is he always having a solution for something? How is he so well spoken? He's probably using beta blockers before he does public speaking. He's probably using some peptides to improve his, his overall skill learning and acquisition. And he's adapting to his boss's behavioral patterns better than you are. And people have made a lot of success for themselves doing that. Vigor Steve was probably one of the guys who put it on the map with his entrepreneurial stack. Huge, like 4-part series on YouTube about everything you could do to increase your productivity. And so there's a ton of entrepreneurs and CEOs, or even just guys that are working under people in the office, taking advantage of that now. And that's why I said earlier, is like, I think that in the future, everyone is going to be enhanced because you want to level the playing field. And that's how it starts, is that like nobody talks about this stuff. And then slowly more and more people start talking about it. And then with the transparency, people see that and they're like, I want to try that. And then that's how it begins. And I think that's why like steroid use is probably more widespread. More people are talking about it, but of course there's also more information about how to do it safely.
Yeah.
So do you see things like CELANC, CEMAX, cerebrolysine, all those Tanner peptides are going to start replacing things like modafinil and Adderall? When I say modafinil and Adderall, the recreational users of those that use them for productivity, or do you think they're just going to be stacked on top of each other? And we're going to be like, I can't remember the actor's name in fucking Limitless, when he takes the pill and can just do whatever for 24 hours, right?
Yeah.
I wonder how far can we push cognition, but what maybe is the downside? Like, do we need to cycle those things, for example? If we are redlining our brain by taking Adderall and whatever, CEMAX every day at work, do I need to take the weekend off, for
Right.
example?
I think it's a great question. So I think that the Adderall and other things like modafinil, there's even like now more widely available is fludrafenil, which is in like a modified version of it. So it's actually available on the research sites. So all of these things, like they do fulfill their own task. So it's best to look at it like a toolbox, and you have to decide which tool is right for the right job. The stimulants are pretty dangerous. I think for people who are like absolutely redlining themselves on stimulants to the point that they're losing their sleep, you're going to get a net loss, and inevitably that's going to mess you up. If you understand like kind of the cognitive world in a career sense is like the bodybuilding world, where it's like, okay, I'm going to push really hard for 10 years, and then I'm I sell my company or I retire or whatever, then you did it the right way. But if you're just like constantly burning yourself out, like chasing that high infinitely, that's going to catch up with you for sure. So, but the compounds like the Samax, the Salonc, they seem to be a lot more innocuous in that sense, where they can be run pretty long term. Compounds like cerebrolysin, it seems like it's probably best used like periodically, like, you take a month or two out of the year and just do a full course of that. It's a weird injection. It's like, 5 or 10 milliliters that you have to shoot up every day. Really weird, but goes in like butter from what I hear.
5 or 10 milliliters?
Yeah.
Because there's kind of idea that running your brain, say redlining it, for want of a better word, right? Maybe increases like glutamate buildup in the brain, amyloid plaque buildup, and all that type of thing. So it's in your head. If you had someone who was, say, an entrepreneur came to you and said, "This is my 5-year plan.
Yeah,
I want to be a fucking genius for the next 5 years," and then would you personally have them take time away from that stuff because of those dangers, or is there anything that you would put in to mitigate them, or are you reasonably confident that you can probably run that type of thing for long term?
I think it's kind of just like cycle design. The human body loves to perform at 100%, but it can't do it indefinitely. It's going to have its moments of like 110%, 120%, which we are doing, and then reel it back to maybe like 80, 60, 50. And so if you schedule these breaks into the CEO stacks that you're designing, then this person knows, okay, I have until this date to push as hard as I physically can, get everything done, and then I know that I need to take some time off. And you look at some of the most successful people in the world, and it's like they do have it built into their schedules where it's like you have to just breathe. You have to go on a trip, spend some time with your family, like be a normal human. You can't be a robot automaton all day long, as much as some people would like to be.
Well, we should also probably note that the assumption being in there would be the same thing with the anabolics and the training. They still have to be doing the skill acquisition. Of trying to acquire and build the skill that they're actually trying to do.
Sure.
Right. And with the compounds that you're speaking about, if I was to compare them to, say, Adderall, which that I've tried, and yes, it does help. It's like you're like fucking Rocket Man, but after so many days, it helped with that one. Even after like one day, then I'm a complete moron for the 2 days after I took it. So the net of all that would have been higher if I didn't use it at all and did the work over the 3 days. Does that same, and obviously it's going to be individual, right? Yeah. With the peptides, is that going to be something that would be experienced as it would be with, say, the Adderall, or not so much with the modafinil, but somewhat with the modafinil as well?
Yeah. You're definitely just trying to mitigate all the negatives of it and then maximize the positives of it. So, for example, if we know that we have a client that will experience a huge crash after using something like Adderall, we'll of course adjust dosing to see if we can find a better sweet spot that's more sustainable, so they can take it, say, like 3 or 4 days out of the week, and then the other days they are able to rest. And then on those rest days, we go into a recovery mode. So we're trying to bring in products that will essentially minimize the overall brain stress that they've experienced and get them to a position where they're recovering during that night's rest, so that when they wake up the next day, they're going to make the most of that Adderall. It's a pretty quick turnaround, and in some cases it's like we've seen it better in like 2 or 3 day bursts and then a break, but it's all going to depend on the individual about like how much they can actually handle, right? And sometimes it is like a prolonged period of time where it's like you're stressing yourself out for about a month straight, and then you're going to need to take 2 weeks, 4 weeks, an entire month or so off to just recover from it and rest and do nothing, and then come back to the grind of it.
Well, it's interesting to see how that end has progressed over decades to where it was just Coke. Just,
Wolf of Wall Street.
Wolf of Wall Street into that, which just compounds.
I mean, I think the one thing that I've seen with using like cognitive enhancement is the brain basically runs on 2 things, which is basically glucose and choline, probably the 2 things it burns through the fastest.
Yeah.
So obviously glucose is diet related, but having something a lot of choline in your diet, whether it's from like alpha GPC or food based, probably can't get enough food based, to be fair, is important to make sure your brain has enough raw material to redline for longer. I would say, like, I've noticed when people are using stuff like Salang, Semax, whatever, the effects will wear off. And quite often it seems to be associated with them getting like a stiff neck and headaches and stuff like that. And then all of a sudden you give them higher doses of choline and you get rid of that choline deficit, and then everything kind of starts working. The headaches and the stiff neck, I'm not really sure why exactly it presents like that. Maybe you have an idea, I don't know.
I'm not sure.
I think it could be actually leaching, as in the brain needs choline. Your body is probably going to look after your brain first because it's kind of important, right? So I suppose the theory would be it leaches choline from the tissues around it to give the brain what it needs, and then you start getting soreness in your neck and all that type of thing. So, but if you are redlining with stuff like that, whether it's modafinil, Adderall, your brain still needs raw fuel to run fast, which will be glucose and choline for the most part. So
no, I think that's a good conversation to have, because colleagues of mine or friends of mine that have businesses use, if it is the Adderall or the modafinil or what was before modafinil was
Salang and so
it began with a V.
Vyvanse?
Not the Vyvanse. Maybe it's I'm sorry, Provigil.
Okay,
right. Provigil is they get into the habit of that, and then by the time night comes around, it's like 4 milligrams of Xanax. Boom, just knock the fuck out, and then boom, come back up the next day, and it goes through there, and that becomes that spiral, basically from hell, which just leads into 4 weeks of being dead. You know, whereas what you're talking about, if they wouldn't need that Xanax, or I don't want to say the person's name, but you know, drinking 2 bottles of NyQuil, you know, just to be able to knock them out at night, and that's what I've seen, you know, over that whole time period, to where these things that you're talking about here, to me, seems like a way safer route than, you know, blasting, and then just and alcohol as well would be another one, and then just knocking yourself out, waking up in the morning feeling like complete ass. Like, well, I feel like fucking shit today, so I guess I need to take fucking another one.
I mean, with the Adderall, I mean, if you, and again, you probably
and I mean, he kind of noted it by, you know, watching the dose, titrating the dose. But again, like in the real world, when they don't have somebody that's helping them, it's like the people that are blasting test on a shitty motorcycle and just overdoing the whole thing. And then what they find is, you know, blast that super hard, doesn't work anymore, take more, fuck, now I can't sleep for shit, now I need to drink a whole pint of whiskey. And
but if you just do a little bit of research to find out what system you're fucking.
No, but it's interesting though, right? Because now we're talking about an older demographic, right? So like a 35 to maybe 45 demographic, which has the same fucking problem that he was talking about with the kids, where here's your little study guide with the first thing of do your research. And you would think that when it's 35 to 45, they would think, well, maybe I should do some research. But they don't. No.
And I suppose
meanwhile, wait. Meanwhile, they're still going to say these fucking kids are lazy as fuck and don't do their research.
Well, I suppose the likeness there would be, you know, we take the teenage meathead, whatever and then we go the 35-year-old entrepreneur. I suppose if they come to you for the entrepreneur stack, for example, is your first question going to be, well, what's your work schedule? You know, like, you want to optimize your productivity, but what system are we trying to hotwire here? If you're like, oh, well, I just go off the cuff and I work from home and get up at 10 a.m. and bum around on Netflix for an hour. And you're like, well, why are we trying to now we're trying to hotwire the crappy bike again, right?
No, that's a good point. Now you're trying to hotwire 4 hours of time to where you should just better manage the 8 hours.
And that's just where it begins with, is like, okay, fundamentally, like, this could be someone who just has like a horrible diet and there's so many micronutrient deficiencies that, like, once you fix that, they don't even really need drugs. They're like, wow, I have so much energy every day. Like, I feel so good. Like, you know, are you sure it's just like this one thing you added? I'm like, no, dude, I put it in as a placebo, but you change your diet and now it works for you. Like, wow, this vitamin D is going crazy. No, it's not.
It's bacteriostatic water. Really,
exactly. I mean, people just want the magic pill so bad, and they want to believe that, you know, their crummy little bike, if they just like put a really pretty paint color over it and they like supercharge it, then all of a sudden it's fixed. It's like, dude, underneath all of that, it's still a crappy car. Like, you do need to do an upgrade. You need to fix that. So
how often do you run into that where people are coming to you for cycle design or whatever it might be, and you genuinely have to turn around and go, no, please do this?
Yeah. And it's a hard conversation to have because, like we talk about it, it's like there's someone who books my call and I see on their blood work, because they pull blood work, I see like the date of birth and it says like 2004 or no, even younger. I've seen like 2008 and you're like, what are you doing here? Like, first of all, how did you even get blood work? But like, besides that point, it's really like, okay, now we need to sit back and like look at everything, and I need to understand like what's your family life like? Are there any underlying mental things that we should actually talk about? And oftentimes I'll discover like they went through a breakup recently, their parents are getting a divorce. There's like some sort of a stressor in their life where they're turning all of that like negative emotion and darkness into like, I don't care if it kills me. I just want to get better at the one thing that is working for me. And oftentimes it is the gym for these kids. And it can be an amazing place of productivity and like self-worth and confidence. But bringing in the enhancements too early gives it a toxic shade, if you will. And I think guys are basically just getting in trouble there. And once you get to the underlying reason of like, okay, why do you actually want to do this? And then they kind of confess like, I have this issue, I have that issue, whatever. And I'm like, you and I could do a lot, and I could make you into something really great in a couple years. And then they start to listen to me. There's maybe some back and forth on email after the fact. And once they make that decision for themselves, that's the thing. The biggest thing is that they have to come to that decision themselves. I can't tell them, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. They're not going to listen to me. They're going to find someone else who's just going to give them the drugs and say, thanks for the money, and run off with it. But if I have a call with a kid and I'm able to convince him, like, it's not for you, I give him a refund. 30 minutes out of my time to save a kid's life, I'll do it.
Mm-hmm. Sure. How do you deal with, kind of going back down the PED route now, I'm sorry. How do you deal with the kind of changing culture now that it seems to be that once you start, that's it forever? Whereas like there was genuine cycles, and now having actual cycles with actual time off seems to be a thing of the history almost. Yeah.
I think that we look at time off different now, where it's arguably a little bit healthier to be taking our hormone levels, and instead of completely bottoming them out to zero and then resurrecting them from the grave over and over again, we know that the human body loves homeostasis. It doesn't want to be doing huge changes, and we already see that with like the side effects that guys will get from huge hormone fluctuations. So instead, if we just like bridge guys up into their growing phases, like week by week, increasing the doses to stave off the fat development, keep the diet where it needs to be, and then we can bring them down a little bit and have them cruising at a TRT dosage where their blood work's healthy. That's my number one thing, is that the time off, in my eyes, is really just like getting their hormones in a place where it's healthy, but they might still be using TRT. And that's going to depend from person to person. I like to look at PCT as, if you are going to come off, you should probably expect to be coming off for a much longer period of time, like say like a year, 2 years, maybe even longer, and then consider getting back on again. But if you're in it, like, I'm trying to be a bodybuilder, I want to compete, I want to look like this, whatever, then understand that it's going to be a little bit more compressed of a time window. And then afterwards, you can probably start taking that down to a more...
In those examples where you're talking about having a 1 or 2 year off period, how long would the on period be? So that scenario,
the on period is the blasting and cruising, essentially. That on period, or the off period particularly, really depends on, and the two most common things I see is the individual doesn't want to do cycles anymore, or that they're tired of injecting, they're sick of it, whatever. And usually I try to get guys just on injectable L-carnitine just to start them out, like, realize what it's like to be injecting yourself every day, just in case you hate it, you didn't mess up your hormones in the process. And then the second portion of it is guys are trying to have a kid, and if they can't get fertile parameters on TRT, then they are probably going to need to come off and switch to a total fertility program. Sure. Usually those are the two things.
Do you have any guidelines then? So say client comes to you and it is going to be one of those scenarios where it's like, I'm going to be on for life because I'm in the bodybuilding life or whatever. Yeah. What kind of parameters are you putting in place to mitigate, whether it's fertility, general lifestyle, anything that keeps them healthy in the long term, knowing that it's going to be external hormone usage for their entire life, not just maybe the cycle that you designed for them.
Yeah. And they know it.
Yeah.
So because I don't think most people really get that.
Yeah, sure. Okay. It's one of the first things on my list is like PCT is not 100% successful in every man. You got to be willing to, pin yourself for life. So
I mean, even if they don't know it, he might know it from talking to them and being like, well, with how driven, within 2 weeks of being on, you see the difference it makes to them and how much you're like, okay, this is
now
it
he's bit by the bug. He's probably not coming off.
Yeah, but I'm on that back end of that, right? So it's not like something I'm looking fucking forward to, but I'm literally stuck with it, for the rest of my life.
Yeah. So once that's out of the way, and
let me. I wouldn't have changed anything. I want to put that out.
Oh,
there,
yeah.
Right. But I don't know. Actually, I wouldn't have cared.
Yeah. Sure.
Right. But now it's literally just a pain in the ass.
Well said. Well spoken. So I think as far as like managing that, given that it's going to be a lifetime commitment, it's good to understand it's just assessment and adjustment. So assessment is the blood work, assessment is the blood pressure, assessment is the glucometer, but also your fertility parameters. You should be getting a fertility test done. Like I work with a at-home fertility testing kit company, so you can just get it shipped to your house. You don't have like a doctor in the next room like hearing you crank one out. Like that's not comfortable. But you want to be getting that tested, because a lot of guys don't realize like, your fertility is a big consideration. Some guys are unaffected. Like I've used a bunch and not had issues with my fertility at all, but there's other guys who have tons of problems, and so they need to be ready for that. So then the other side of the spectrum is like, okay, how do we actually maintain that fertility? And that's the adjustment, is like, what drugs can we bring in that are bringing up healthy fertility parameters? So typically that's going to be like the best options would be recombinant LH, recombinant FSH. That's identically replacing what your body's losing when you get on testosterone. So HMG, great example. That is those two things. And then HCG being the mimetic of LH, basically like the synthetic replacement. That's another good example of something where it's like much more common, much more easily accessible, and better priced. And across the board, I've seen very successful outcomes with using HCG. So some variation of those things, potentially using enclomiphene or Clomid if needed, if they're not responding well to the other things. And then, we just test their fertility, say once a year. And if their fertility markers are dwindling, then maybe we'll increase the dosage of these things. Maybe we'll increase the frequency of these things, or the duration, how long they're on them. Any measurable metric that we can scale up or down, that's what will make that adjustment and make sure it works better for their body.
Do you have a hard time convincing them to do those things? Because as Dave has mentioned in a previous podcast, if you asked 20-year-old Dave, like, are you worried about your fertility when you're going on cycle? Fuck no.
Yeah.
Right? So like,
it's a benefit.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So like, do you have to have that conversation on where like, no, instead of spending your extra money on growth hormone, you should spend your money on this because you just don't know.
Yeah.
And if it's gone for too long, then good luck with IVF and all that kind of stuff.
Right. Exactly. So the best you can do is basically just lay it all out for them and say like, hey, listen, like this is a real consideration, and I think it's something you should consider. At least just get it checked, whatever. And some guys are like, nah, I don't want kids. Nah. And then they meet the right girl and she's like, oh my gosh, I want to start a family with you. And he's like, yeah, good luck with that. My balls are the size of tiny little peas right now. So no luck there. There are cases where you can resurrect that fertility. It can be difficult and it can take a long while in some cases, but in other cases you can find success. I've been successful in every fertility case I've had to deal with. But obviously I'm still pretty lucky and I haven't had a huge clientele for that long. Mm-hmm. Eventually I might run into cases where it's like, it's just not working.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Yeah.
Cool. I mean, something that you mentioned when you answered the questions before was mentioning generational differences in mental health and mentality. So this is kind of a shift, I'm sorry, but what did you mean by that?
Yeah. So I think you guys, having grown up with the magazines, if you saw someone that you wanted to look like, or like a feat of strength that you wanted to mimic, all you saw was like the person lifting it. There wasn't like a constant live stream or posts about like, hey, I'm on this steroid, I'm on this steroid, whatever, or it's like constantly in your face. You probably get a magazine like, a month, every other month or something like that, depending on the frequency of it. You weren't exposed to it that often. Your surroundings were the dudes at your gym, and am I bigger than this one? Am I stronger than this guy? It's a small pond, right? The pond is now infinitely large. The pond is the entirety of humanity. And so we can imagine why a 16-year-old or a 17-year-old is like thinking about steroids when they're seeing on their Instagram feed some 18-year-old is benching like well into the 500s. And they're like, well, how in the world am I going to do that? I don't compare at all. And so there's that element of comparison. It just destroys these guys where it's like they want to be as good as everyone else. And it's super difficult to accept that genetics probably aren't there. how do you get over that hurdle? That's a very large internal struggle, realistically.
So it's kind of I suppose, a form of confirmation bias in a way where, because of the way all the algorithms work, we all get shown the 18-year-old benching 6 plates. We don't get shown the 1,000 other 18-year-olds benching 1 plate.
Yeah.
And you think that's giving people skewed perceptions?
Yeah.
And kind of leading everyone down this rabbit hole?
Right. And it affects so much of our current society, where it's like, I made a video about girls and PEDs, where a lot of the Instagram models that guys are seeing on their pages or whatever, are like girls that they look up to. A lot of them are using stuff and not talking about it. And so it creates horribly unrealistic body standards for women. And so girls are like, well, I must just hate myself and I'm ugly and there's nothing I can do about it. It's like, honey, she's on Anavar and growth hormone and whatever, and has had like, thousands of dollars of work done, but just isn't talking about it. And then it creates, again, just a completely different standard. And the only natural response when a human looks at that is, I don't size up to that. And then there's two options. If you know what they've done, then it's, I have the option to try and do what they've done to look like her. Or if you don't know what they've done, then it's just depression. It's just this, I wish I could look like that, but I don't.
Mm-hmm. So what I wonder with that, and granted, I grew up in a different generation, so I can't really, if I was 20 now, coming up, who's to say,
Sure.
I'm not one of those fucking Gen X guys that are going to think that I would be the exception to the rule. Mm-hmm. But what I wonder is, what you see, what you're talking about, what you see online is kind of like what we would see in the magazine and so forth. But when we go to the gym, not everybody in the gym was fucking jacked. Most of the people weren't. Yeah. And when they're going to the gym today, if they're actually looking around at everybody that's in the gym training, they're probably in better shape than 90% of those people there. So that's where I lack comprehension with kind of what you're saying with that, because now you step outside of the gym and you're just going to the grocery store and you look around, you're probably the best person in shape. Yeah. Where, I can remember, granted, I'm in Columbus, so I had to change my perspective. But if I was at Ohio State football game, there's 100,000 people in there. I'm like, yeah, motherfucker, I probably squat more than everybody in this. Then I'd have to ask myself, to anybody at Westside, are they here? Mm-hmm. But even way with that, I probably squatted more than almost everybody in that whole 100,000 crew. And so what I guess I'm trying to say is, why are they not looking at their actual real world surroundings and using that as their base of comparison instead of what is on their phone, which is a small representation of actually everybody who is in gyms.
Right. And so it might feel like a small representation, but then you look at like the average screen time for someone that age, and it's like 8-10 hours, like unbelievable numbers. Well, you only spend 2 hours in the gym at most. Point. And then you're now spending the remainder of your day. You went into the gym, you're like, wow, I got my PR. I finally benched 225, like super happy about myself. Pull up Instagram, some kid who's like 4 years younger than you, getting silly with your weight, throwing it off of him, clapping, catching it. And you're like, wow, I feel great about myself. Yeah. So there's like a natural comparison. There's definitely room for guys who have developed that emotional maturity where they're like, I'm on my own path. I'm not comparing myself to anybody else. You have to consider like, what time did you even get into the gym? There are guys who started when they were like 12, like complete infants, and they're working out, whatever. They've developed a huge foundation that other people just don't have if they started when they were 30. I mean, you can imagine what that might be like. It's like you see all these kids that are younger than you, more fit than you. It's going to weigh on them a little bit. But the healthiest thing you can do is just try to remind yourself that your only competitor is who you were yesterday. Mm-hmm. And as much as we'd like that to be the case, you're just being bombarded with competitors all over the place. But if instead of seeing it as competition, if you try to look at it as like admiration, like you are looking up to these people, you're following in their footsteps. You might not actually get to where they're at, but it's impressive and you're admiring them. You're putting that appreciation where it's due.
No, the screen time is the piece of that puzzle that I overlooked. Yeah. Because if that's 8 hours, on average, that's a lot. Yeah. That's kind of compared to the time in the gym, that's a big fucking difference. Yeah.
And I have so many kids telling me like, oh, I don't have time to, do all these injections or like work out or whatever. Like, I don't have time to cook my own meals. Like, dude, look at your screen time. You have 8 hours that you're using on God knows what. But it's not the gym. It's not your diet. Mm-hmm.
So do you think if it is just a case of exposure, as in like I spend more time looking at lifters on social media than I do lifters in the gym, for example, like by comparison. Do you think if we were to just change that exposure, those kind of preconceptions and opinions would just start to change?
I think so, because the human brain just looks for patterns and contrast. And so imagine if you set up a gym in the center of Walmart and you were the only person that could use it, and you would just like get sick and pumped and look huge all day, and you'd look around you and you'd see like the average American man/woman, which is obese and overweight, and you would feel amazing about yourself. You're like, wow, like I got to be the most jacked dude on earth. And then you step into an Olympia expo and you're like, wow, I'm the smallest dude on earth. Mm-hmm. It's all a game of comparison and like where you rank yourself compared to everyone else. And the metaphor I like to use is like a smart kid at his local high school going to Harvard, where it's like, oh, I'm the biggest fish in this pond. Like, you know, I look great, whatever. And then you download Instagram for the first time, scroll for a little bit. You don't feel so big anymore. You go to Harvard, you're now surrounded by all these brainiacs. You don't feel so smart anymore. Sure. It's a game of comparison.
But if that's what's perhaps leading to the proliferation of drug use in younger individuals, which is probably a reasonably safe assumption, it's at least contributing to it, right? Because your expectations are now so much higher. You probably want to get there quicker because you're being bombarded with it every day. Like, what can we realistically do to like help realign people's expectations? Like, you know what, like, if you can look in the mirror, you know, say you've been training for a few years, and if you can look in the mirror and look at any given day reasonably muscular and reasonably lean, you're probably doing better than 90% of people that train. Yeah. And then by default, you're doing better than 99.9% of people full stop.
Right. Yeah.
Right. But we all forget that. Yeah. Right. And I'm not saying we're all not guilty of that either. Yeah. But how do we go about trying to wedge that back into people's kind of conscious mind?
Yeah. So I think like the statistics are one way that people will try to make the problem better, but we can also apply those statistics to like something that's more readily accessible, where it's like income, where if you take the average American income, they are a quadrillionaire, billionaire compared to the world at large. Mm-hmm. But does the average American feel like a billionaire? Do they feel like a millionaire? No, they don't, because they're looking at their surroundings. They know how much things cost. They know how much, like, how expensive things are, whatever. It's like they are struggling to make it happen. And the same will kind of happen with physique, where it's like, given your context, given your environment, that's what determines your worth. So I think like if we want to go into this from a PED standpoint, where it's okay, we understand that there's probably some insecurity here. There's probably some negative emotions surrounding your self-identity and whether or not you're considering drugs. Well, you want to make sure that people are doing the drugs for the right reasons, because it is a big undertaking. It's a huge commitment, and it's not something that people should take lightly. If they are going to take it lightly, then they should dose it lightly. In the sense that, you know, if you have someone who is a complete screw off and doesn't do anything right, and you just put them on TRT, you know how many TRT dads are out there that just get prescribed it and, like, you know, still drinking on the weekends, eating their burgers and doing whatever. Like, they don't train, they don't need to, but the TRT kind of helps them feel better, helps them perform for their wife, and that's it. For someone who's getting into the gym like that, and like that's all they use it for, I think they'll that's the idea, that they'll realize, like, okay, it's not magic, I do actually have to work for it, but the real devil is the dosage. Guys will always love until the end of the earth that they can just take more and more and more and more, and it's going to change the world. But it's a popular topic where it's like, no one thinks that way in other sports. No one thinks like, you know, if I take enough of this drug, I'm going to be LeBron James. It's like, no, he's obviously he's a genetic freak. He's a phenom. I'm never going to be like that. Why is bodybuilding different?
Sure. Right. But let's try and put a different spin on that for 1 sec then. So yeah, we've all kind of talked about the negatives of PED usage, right? Sure. What about the positives of it being more looked at, not frowned upon? So, you know, just to use me as a personal example, I have been on TRT self-prescribed since I was like 19, because it was the only thing that stopped me being suicidal. Yeah. You know, I tried every antidepressant. Yeah. I was told I would never get prescribed testosterone, despite them all being in the tank, just because I was too young, regardless. And I wouldn't be here if I didn't do that, right? And I don't doubt I am not the only one. I don't doubt there are people who are way worse, you know, who are probably similar. So, like, the fact that we now know that things like TRT, you know, not necessarily through the self-prescribed route, but things like that are options for people who are stuck in those scenarios. Yeah. How many people now have an avenue that they didn't know existed that could be life-saving?
Dude, it's mind-blowing to hear you say that, because that was exactly my position. So, I mean, props to you for actually getting through it, because that was me. I went through the whole gamut of, you know, my parents found a journal entry that I wrote, and they were like super concerned about me, whatever. I went through all the psychiatric medications they could possibly throw at me, and always felt worse, didn't really feel better. Got into whole lifting, and that was besides the point for about using hormones. And then once I got on testosterone, I was like, everything changed. Like all of a sudden I had confidence. All of a sudden I felt like I had worth and I meant to exist in this world, and there wasn't like a mistake that was made somehow. And it just grew from there. And so realizing that was something that I couldn't help but talk about. And I wanted to tell people online, like, this did legitimately change my life. So unfortunately, when guys have such positive experiences with testosterone, the default is, well, they want to go talk about it online. And then the response is, why are you glorifying steroids? Why are you saying that like this stuff is so good? Like, you know that there's kids watching this content. There's like, you know, there's like 16-year-olds that are watching this are going to try and hop on stuff. It's a delicate balance because it's right in the right settings. You know, there's a right tool for the right job. You're not going to give a plunger to an electrician. Like, you know, it makes sense for certain people, but not for others. And that's the real delicate part of it, where it's like, I know how much it helped me. I know how much it could help other people, but I also know how much it could really hurt people. The metaphor that comes to mind is like a blade, like a scalpel. It can end lives in a murderer's, but it can save them in a surgeon's. And so you want to just use the right tool for the right job.
Sure. But you mentioned, like, with your clientele that you're dealing with, there seems to be a trend of maybe testosterone being lower over time, which we've kind of seen in the studies, or in what you've seen, estrogen maybe being higher. You know, there are probably going to be more and more people in that scenario, you know, like we've been in, or something similar, where they just need it. And if it was still taboo, underground, do not talk about this,
they don't even know that there's a solution.
Who knows what's going to happen to those people? So, you know, it's as many negatives as there are, I think that doesn't get talked about enough, that now there are avenues for men and women that aren't afraid to go out now and be like, I'm in a crappy situation, which I have done nothing directly to cause. And there are hormone, you know, whether it's testosterone or whatever else it might be now, and I don't have to feel shame or, you know, social judgment or whatever for getting what is a medical condition. You know, diagnosed and treated. So I just think that gets kind of not talked about enough.
No. And then also enclomiphene has been really revolutionary, where I've had so many guys come to me and tell me like, dude, enclomiphene completely changed my life, where they don't have to go as far as doing the testosterone injections anymore. We now have this happy medium where the exact issue is just like deficient testosterone, whatever. We're able to fix that. And with minimal side effects everywhere else, without the need for injections, people are happy, and that's what I want to see. So it's making it even more and more and more accessible, where, you know, for whatever reason, the issues that we're having in our world where testosterone levels are dropping, we need to start developing countermeasures to that. And so far, so good.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, with anything, there's yin and yang, right? So it doesn't matter what it is. You know, so if it is, you know, the anabolics for so many years, it just, like I said, when we started, it's a net positive, you know, that it's being discussed more now than it was before. You know, but with that, there's going to be that balance between those two. And you're always going to have, you know, the haters on one side and then the people that are glorifying it on the other side. And with anything, the answer is always kind of in the middle that nobody really wants to kind of look at. But, and with that yin and yang, there's always mitigation, you know, on both sides of that. With the scalpel, the same type of thing. I've spent most of my life training in unconditioned gyms, and I know most of you that are training in garage gyms, private gyms, black iron gyms, know what I'm talking about when I say the heat sucks. It kills your motivation to go to the gym, it kills your performance, but it doesn't have to if you keep your electrolytes up. That's why today's episode is sponsored by Element. Element is a tasty electrolyte drink with everything you need and nothing you don't. This means lots of salt with none of the junk. No sugar, no colors, no artificial ingredients, no gluten, no fillers, no BS. It contains an electrolyte ratio of 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 milligrams of potassium, and 60 milligrams of magnesium. Element can help prevent and eliminate headaches, muscle cramps, fatigue, brain fog, sleeplessness, and other common symptoms associated with electrolyte deficiency. Right now, Element is offering a free sample pack with any drink mix purchase. Get yours at drinkelement.com. This deal is only available through the Table Talk link. Are you looking to boost recovery, enhance your sex drive, and improve performance in the gym? Do you think your hormones are out of whack and you're tired of getting the runaround from your doctor? You know, things like your hormones are just fine, stop lifting heavy weights, etc., etc., etc. I know what that feels like, as I've been down that road most of my life. This is why we've partnered with Mer Health. Mer Health is a premium telehealth platform that specializes in hormone optimization and preventative medicine, ensuring a better quality of life. Mer Health offers a table talk panel tailored for our listeners, featuring comprehensive tests like total and free testosterone, sensitive estradiol, and advanced markers like lipoprotein A and IGF-1. These comprehensive panels of up to 84 carefully selected biomarkers allow you to identify areas of enhancement and maximize your physical, cognitive, and sexual performance. It's much different than the panels you may get from your doctor. Choose between self-service options where you can select lab panels based upon decades of experience, or opt for guided optimization with your own health coach. Start with a detailed breakdown of your labs and receive personalized treatment options, both over the counter and prescription. Visit merrickhealth.com/tabletalk and use the code TABLETALK to get 10% off your first order. Mer Health isn't just about better health, it's about empowering you to take control of your well-being.
4, 3, 2, 1.
Are we done selling this?
I'm done. All right. Guys, this is the new elitefts.com box squat box. It weighs 73 pounds, I'm told.
It weighs 3 pounds.
You've got your story, I've got mine. He says 3, I say 73. This is absolutely amazing, guys, no joke. You can box squat on this. I'm gonna box squat it tomorrow. This sucker is strong, ridiculously strong, and it is light, guys, no joke. You can carry this anywhere, put this in your gym. Anybody can use this. It's extremely affordable as well. I really can't believe it. So I'm sure they're gonna tell you all the details down below or the side or somewhere, but this thing is absolutely amazing. 73 pounds, guys, 73 pounds.
And be a surgeon with a scalpel, but not know how to use it.
Yeah.
You know, or malpractice does
Yeah,
exist.
exactly. Yeah.
Right. So it's all that's life.
Yeah.
You know, that's the world. But when certain things get stigmatized, that gets forgotten.
Yeah.
You know, and that it's weird with the whole TRT thing, how it's progressed, because it goes through those phases every few years too. Mm-hmm. You know, where it's like, I thought we were okay with this being this, but is it now time to demonize it again? Like, what the hell, you know? And it will just continue where at some point it's going to stabilize.
Yeah.
Like SSRIs have basically stabilized where they, for the most part. I mean, you still have the haters and, you know, the glorifiers and stuff like that, but testosterone's still in that really weird ocean where the waves are just pounding back and forth.
I look at it kind of, I think football is a pretty good metaphor, where football has such like a positive stigma around it. So it's a good comparison point to steroid usage, where inherently football is an extremely dangerous sport. I mean, the amount of CT and head trauma that guys are experiencing on a regular basis is crazy.
We'll add to that, you know, knee injuries, ankle, all the other injuries.
The whole 9 yards.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so, but people don't think twice about it. It's like, you get banged up, whatever, you know. Testosterone, you know, within our community, it's like, we know what it's like to be, it's like, you know, clocked in blood pressure a little bit high. Like, to us, it's normal. But to the outside world, it's like, you people are crazy. You know, you're gambling with your life. Football, similar situation. You are gambling with your life, but there's a different stigma where people are totally acceptable of it. And then we do have the yin and yang of like, okay, we understand it's dangerous. What can we do to make it safer? So there's advancements in helmet design. There's advancements in like, you know, PT regimens and the injury recovery protocols that they're bringing in for players, and also supplementation, everything they can do to make it safer for them. And that's essentially what steroid use is it's an inherently dangerous activity, which we are trying to make safer. And the more transparency we have about it, the more, you know, the more outwardly spoken football players are about like CT and head trauma, the more push there is to develop healthier technologies and ways to play the game and ways to just protect your players without sacrificing results. How do you harmonize those two things? It's always a yin and yang.
Well, I can throw, you know, it's alcohol is accepted, you know, but is way worse for you than TRT. But yeah, TRT is still scheduled the same as heroin. So figure that all out.
You mentioned like football and better technologies, helmets, etc. Then, so in the world of strength training, physique enhancement, whatever, what's the next step look like there, do you think?
So I think one of the biggest ones recently was the popularization of ezetimibe. I think for a while it was just like default is like, well, if your cholesterol's messed up, you kind of just have to change your diet or get on a statin. Whereas ezetimibe is this, I mean, beautiful blue ocean between it all, where it's maximal reductions in, you know, LDL and excess cholesterol. In exchange for minimal side effects. Whereas like I know guys who they get on the statins, they just don't feel so good, you know, joints achy, whatever variety of symptoms they might encounter. Ezetimibe never had those problems. And it's like doses as low as 10 milligrams a day. There's even cardiologists that are trying to put it in the US drinking water supply because they know how impactful it would be for the population at large. So that's one example. I feel like this is kind of a little bit older, but the switch from ACE inhibitors more towards angiotensin receptor blockers has also been widely accepted. And that was, you know, over the course of the last like probably 5-10 years, something like that. But as far as like the future of harm mitigation, I think really the next level is mental health. And as far as like preventing neurological degradation from using so many steroids. Unfortunately, there are guys in our space who just like, they don't think the same, they don't act the same as they used to, like, you know, 20 odd years ago, 30 odd years ago. And we really need to hone in more on why that's happening. You know, the steroids are inherently neurotoxic. Which ones are better or worse than others? What sorts of things can we do to minimize that risk? Because right now we have all the meds and drugs in the world to prevent all the physical risks, but you can't really protect your brain that much.
Sure. But it's interesting that if you ask the question about what's the future of performance enhancement look like, all your answers are health related.
The drugs work, man. I feel like we don't need.
Do you know what I mean? Like there isn't a new form of testosterone because, as you've mentioned, like we can saturate androgen receptors. We've kind of done that.
Yeah.
So we've kind of when you've ticked that box now what do we do? So that's why I think like maybe where the peptides are coming in. You know, like, is it going to open the door to people? And then the question becomes like, with all these health mitigation drugs, is it a good thing if it allows people to get away with taking more
drugs?
So, like, for example, guy takes high dose trend for a bodybuilding comp, can't sleep, takes DSIP. So now he can sleep. Yeah. Now he can take 200 milligrams more and still sleep and still. Is that a good thing?
Is that happening? That's what I.
Absolutely, it's happening. So, you know, one of the most popular ones was injectable Superdrol. One of my clients with a lot of followers was telling his following about it, and it kind of got a lot of reputation behind it as like this freakifying drug. And the main reason behind it is that oral Superdrol, a lot of people, they are way too sensitive to the liver destruction of it. Like guys will feel sick within a couple days, if not a week. You can't use it sustainably. It's just not possible. Whereas injectable, of course, there's less pass-throughs on the liver, and the outcome is, well, gee, I get to take more and take it for longer. I get to look better and sicker and even cooler for longer. And that's kind of where the world is progressing, where it's like, you can kind of think back to like, okay, how much risk can I accept in football? It's like, how many times can I bang my head against someone else's head before I get head trauma? Well, hey, here's this super advanced helmet. Now you can bang your head even harder against this guy's head. Okay, I'm going to do it. And then you become even more, just the human wants to do as much as it's able to do. And once you like expand the room where it's like, hey, your blood pressure is normal again. It's like, cool, I'm going to up my doses and make it not normal again.
So that's kind of where the question comes.
Right.
Is it all these advancements are those individuals actually going to end up healthier? Or are they going to end up at the same level of health or dishealth, however you want to look at it, but with using more drugs? Yeah. Maybe getting more results in the process, but you know, all the health mitigation drugs just might allow that thing to go up whilst they stay just as unhealthy, as opposed, no one's going to turn around and say, oh, my blood pressure is 20 points lower. Cool. I'm going to keep it there.
Yeah, no.
Those individuals are not going to do that.
No, I mean, that will be one we'll have to see, because it's, as I've said before on the podcast, if I could go back, right, and then mitigate the side effects that I was having, I wouldn't have taken less. The only reason it didn't go up more is because the side effects became so bad that it hurt my performance in the gym.
Yeah.
You know, so I couldn't take more because it was detrimental.
Yep.
So I had to stop, right? So now what if I could have controlled the blood pressure?
Yep.
Which is usually the reason why it had to stop.
Yeah.
Control that, there's no fucking way I would have not upped the dose. There's no way at all. Right. So we'll see. I guess that's the only real answer to that one is we'll see, because something else is going to have to. Well, that maybe you guys do know that. Like, what else would break up or down chain from that. So you control the blood pressure. The lipids are a little bit different, right? Because it's more a long-term type of issue. You're not going to, have a heart. Well, they could have a heart attack for other reasons, because of that. But what would be the next things to break if those things are mitigated?
I would imagine that basically, because we can already saturate our androgen receptors, and so it's like, okay, can we keep someone healthy at like a total testosterone level of 20,000? Well, we have Chase Irons, and Chase is pretty dang healthy at that amount of testosterone in his body. So
Yeah, but he's mitigating a lot.
Exactly, and that's what I'm talking about. So the more we can increase that ceiling, the more room we have to grow. Just like in your position, once that blood pressure is too crazy, it's like, I can't do anymore. I've hit the ceiling, can't go any further. But if that ceiling was like 20 feet higher, you would do it. And that's kind of what Chase is proving to us. So now we have this example of the mitigation works. So how much further can we go with the mitigation? Well, I think probably if we extrapolate this out long term, we keep making medical advancements, we keep making health and safety advancements. Eventually, we're going to hit a point where we are able to use the most dangerous drugs to fully saturate our androgen receptors, and the only limiting factor will be how much oil can I fit in my body?
Scar tissue.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And eventually, you can't inject anymore, and then we have to come up with new methods of just putting the drug in our body, because the carrier oils and the powders mixed into them are just not efficient.
Sure. I mean, I think the next theoretical steps will never happen because there's
intravenous,
not
man. There's got to be a way to make this shit intravenous, and you just
because like in theory, you could start creating drugs that directly stimulate mTOR and myostatin inhibitors, and we've all seen a Belgian blue cow. If you could completely inhibit myostatin, we'd all be huge straight away to a degree within our structure. But there's no money in the at least right now in the pharmaceutical world to create that.
Well, there's also no return on the incentive of being that. Like it wouldn't be rewarded. I mean, there's a certain, you can get that huge and it won't be rewarded on stage. I mean, I guess the example of that would be the synthol stupid freaks.
Yeah.
Right. How many of them are really famous for anything except being stupid?
But if you could completely inhibit myostatin and get maximally large muscular whatever on normal test or mild levels, for example, then does that not have a benefit? I don't know.
The question is like, who would actually do it? And I think I've always been fascinated with this because when I was first researching steroids and stuff, I was so frustrated that there's so many studies that we don't have and they just haven't been done. And now there's no money incentive because the heyday of steroid research is all gone. No one cares anymore. But I'd always wondered, like, okay, let's say someone becomes really successful in this space and they do have a ton of disposable income. What if they could just fund a study themselves? They start their own little organization, they get some researchers together, and they just do a study. And I've almost been a little bit disappointed with like the guys that are at the absolute top of the game for just not doing it. And Vigor Steve's actually been pretty impressive because he's been working with, I think, a researcher in Australia or something like that, who's been doing these like surveys on steroid users. So it's a step in the right direction, but the fitness industry has so much money in it. And I know like the people at the top of their game are probably enhanced in some way or another, at least in the top of income. So it's almost a little bit sad to see that it hasn't happened yet. And maybe there's restrictions and it's just not as easy as I'm making it out to be, but with enough money, probably make it happen.
Sure. Because, if you think in theory, we can create a medicine that binds to a single receptor on a virus or a bacteria or whatever, right? There's no way we can't create a drug that directly binds to a specific receptor or stimulates mTOR, IGF-1, whatever. We can do it. It's just a case of who's going to. Like, what incentive is there to do it? Who's going to gain from it or whatever? But, like, it would be really interesting to see if that happened. Like, what could actually happen to the human body if you started creating those types of drugs?
I will say SARMs are probably an example of where we failed pretty bad. Where we, there's been years of research that have been poured into them. None of them have obviously made it to market. And the idea behind it is, like, we just want purely the androgen receptor activity without any of the, like, androgenicity, more on the anabolism side, so that it's a perfect fit for burn victims, particularly female burn victims that don't want to grow mustaches and stuff, but also don't want to lose all the muscle on their body and have other issues down the line. And we just weren't successful. And this is also a good thing to look at for a company like Wyeth, which was partially responsible for YK11, which was like purported to be that myostatin inhibitor. Of course, it doesn't turn us into Belgian blues, and for obvious reason, because Wyeth has had, I mean, people forget this too, that there's like 9 to 5 scientists that are working around the clock, 40 hours a week, all the time, for 20 plus years on a particular project. And of course, that'll rotate here and there. And if they still have nothing to show for it, what does that mean? The best thing that they were able to produce is YK11, and it still wasn't good enough, at least for them to bring it to market. then I think it might actually be a lot more difficult than we're making it out to be. But, you know, if you waved like $1 million in front of a scientist and said, hey, figure it out, could they do it? I think you might be onto something.
Sure. I just think, like, you know, there's what is going to be the limit of what we can biohack.
Yeah.
You know, like, you know, if you ask someone 30 years ago, could the human body support a 1,300 pound bar on their back or a 1,500 pound bar in their hands? They'd have gone, well, no, that's stupid. Like, bones are going to, this is going to break, that's going to give. There's no, and here we are. You know, yes, those individuals are using supportive equipment, but nothing supporting the skeleton.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So, like, things that we think are crazy 20 or 30 years ago or whatever, or now in 20 or 30 years might just be totally normal.
Well, we just create fucking mutants and clones, you know, by breeding humans with apes, you know, and you know, I mean, if we really want to go far out there,
yeah,
you
We're
know,
all getting arrested.
yeah, just kind of go that way.
Law.
Yeah.
But yeah,
And that may be happening for all we know.
oh God, yeah.
Some lab somewhere, right?
But it's, you know, I just think it's interesting to think, like, there was some videos posted about like how in China they select for their future weightlifting athletes and stuff, and they're like literally going around primary schools and stuff like that and being like, can you get in a front rack position?
Yeah.
What's your broad jump? I know they're starting this selection process at like 5, 6 years old and stuff like that. And it's crazy to see what happens when you put that level of attention onto something. And it's like, if we all did that, and then the same happened in the pharmaceutical world with, you know, if some billionaire just one day went, what is the most muscular human being that could ever be created?
Right, yeah.
You know, it would probably blow our minds.
Well, I think in a way, with say powerlifting and bodybuilding, if you look at the China model and the Russian model, and you go back to early sports development and stuff like that, we've always succeeded, say, in basketball and football, just because we have such a huge population base.
Yeah.
Right. To be able to go into it. So you are getting the genetic outliers that are in all those sports and so forth. As bodybuilding and powerlifting and strength sports have grown so much over the years, what we're getting now is those genetic outliers that are making their way into those sports. So that kind of plays a role in. So we don't have that specific government controlled selection process, kind of have a natural selection process, but before it was a smaller pool. Now it's a bigger pool, right? So when people ask, like, why are bodybuilders, and like, why are they better today, or power lifters and so forth? Well, it's a bigger pool that they're pulling from, where in powerlifting, at least, the first article I ever wrote, I said most of them are, you know, athletes that weren't good enough to play in college, right? Or those that maybe did play and are retired and a little beat up, you know, and that's really all it really was. And, you know, ones that are a little disturbed and introverted and so forth. Now that's not the case. You know, now there's probably a lot of powerlifters that didn't go, you know, play football in high school and go on to college or whatever it is, but they ended up finding powerlifting as a teenager. And then didn't want to play any other sports. And now here they are. And they're hitting all these big numbers. I don't think the training's evolved. Well, it has, but not as much to be able to
explain the
difference that's in there. The difference that's in there is the bigger pool.
Yeah.
Now, I think we still have room for that pool to grow, because none of these guys are making any money. You know, start paying millions, start giving contracts like the NBA, you know, and football, and then we would really see some shit happening, because if the people in the NFL that aren't like the taller ones, you know, the shorter Ed Cohn type build, or the stockier builds, could make as much powerlifting as they, or more, we would see some crazy ass shit.
Oh, I don't doubt. Do you think even, and this question actually came up at the weekend, because someone was posting photos from like the world's strongest man in Vegas with like it was at a stadium and all, and I think the comment was something like, "This is what powerlifting could be," you know. And my instant thought to that would be, considering the demographic that makes up most powerlifters, would they want it to be mainstream?
I don't know. It's shifting.
Yeah.
Because that demographic is shifting, right? So if you go back to when most of them were the introverts that were bullied in high school and all the other kind of stuff, it's not all them now.
No.
Sure.
Right. So now you get the people that are more extroverted, that were better team players and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Then they would,
Yeah.
right? Because they would be the ones that, fuck yeah, they want the glory, they want all that other kind of stuff. Where 30 years ago, if somebody broke an all-time world record, they really,
True.
they don't give a fuck. They don't care if anybody even knows about it. They want to be able to do it, you know, where that team player mentality wants fucking everybody to know.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So it's just different.
True.
That interplay with social media and the whole fitness world has been really interesting to see too. Like the guys who are readily adopting it and really, really going all in on it, and they're super successful on it. It's really unfortunate. I kind of feel for the guys who are more on the introverted side and they don't feel as comfortable on camera and whatnot, because it's such a medium of monetization now, where it's like, if you are that guy that's super outspoken, like you know, you weren't bullied in high school, whatever, and you love just like getting on a camera, talking to people, whatever, then you become this very charismatic voice, and then you're now the figurehead of what powerlifting is. But it's like a fake representation, essentially. It's like a bad representative of the sample, because everyone else is like, you know, 200 followers or something on Instagram, like probably one of the strongest dudes you'll ever meet, but just has no interest in whipping out his camera and talking on social media.
Yeah, I mean, there is a big, there is a piece of this puzzle that I'm kind of leaving out, and I'll be criticized for this, but the sports are harder, you know, so powerlifting, I don't want to say it's, in a way it's harder than football, right? Because the coaches are not the same. You know, you can go through your whole football career and never really have to, you have to know the game, you know, and the best have to know all that kind of stuff, but you're kind of being told all the way through. You know, where here, you know, now there are coaches, it's not 24/7. Like, where I'm going with this is bodybuilding is a whole different world, right? So bodybuilding is this 24/7 fucking grind. There's no way that you're going to get around that grind. So I'm making some broad assumptions here. The introvert's probably going to do better in that world, because it's a monk lifestyle. Yeah. It's a very super disciplined lifestyle. It's a boring ass fucking lifestyle. It's brutal. It's hard. You're dying every day, like the original quote. I mean, that's kind of what that is. Powerlifting's a few steps removed from that, but kind of still this, you know, in that same realm of that consistency and the discipline. You can't just do it for, you know, this meet and then take off 2 months in the off season and not do anything and go to the Bahamas or whatever and come back. It just doesn't work that way. So that personality type, again, broad assumptions, because I'm not a fucking psychologist, I think lends itself more to that, to where it would be a very rare individual, even in bodybuilding, to be very extroverted, really well on camera, and top of the game. Mr. Olympia type thing. Because we don't see that.
No.
There's a couple, but let's say Jay Cutler and stuff like that, but they probably had to work really fucking hard
and
to
even
be able
like
to do that.
Jay's situation, he does still seem like pretty down to earth. Like he's not like crazy extrovert talking to everybody at parties and whatnot. Like when he needs to lock in and be a monk, he does it. Chris Bumstead's an even better example of some guy who's like really introverted. He's had to learn a ton about how to do
that's what I'm saying. It's a skill, right? And going back to something that you said earlier about the influencers that you work with, that, you know, they're using the TRT and all that stuff to be able to build their following and all that other kind of stuff. If they don't develop another skill or branch their channel in some way, you know, say you got death metal or whatever it's going to be, you know, they have, you mentioned Sam kind of like falling down, and I don't think he really gives a shit. No. You know, he's set for life. He's going to be successful with whatever he's going to do after this anyhow. But if that was everything for him, he would have to have some other interest to be able to build that channel, to recreate himself, I guess is where I'm going. You know, because anybody in the industry, or the entertainment industry, has to go through phases of recreating themselves, even if it's an actor or whatever it is. They have to recreate themselves. So influencers are going to be no different with that. I would say they have to do it at a faster rate than what, say, an actor would that would be in Hollywood or something like that.
I emphasize for guys all the time that your life has seasons to it, and it's probably one of the healthiest ways to look at something like bodybuilding as well, where it's like you need to realize that your physique is not your entire life. It's going to be here for a certain amount of time. You know, you're going to be big and jacked and feel cool, and girls are going to like you and whatever, and like guys are going to recognize you, like you'll get all this attention on social media. but it's not everything. And people will get snippets of that. Like, for example, bodybuilders, when they go from shreds, finish a show, whatever, start transitioning into off season, they get fluffier and fluffier. Oh, my posts are getting less likes. Oh, I need to do a throwback photo. I need to find a picture of when I was really lean and then post that, and then that'll get a bunch of likes now. They start to get hints, like it's basically foreboding what will inevitably happen. And that's why one of the most important things is that it's just like you're saying, like you have to be multifaceted. You have to be ready to like switch into another season if that makes sense for you. I've seen guys get their pro cards and then kind of switch into boxing, and then they're now like more on the combat sport side of things. They bring in a whole new audience without totally neglecting their original one. Same with like the educational world. Guys will go from being a bodybuilder, compete for a while, and then switch more into the mentorship side of things and focus on their coaching and their client results, all of that. So you just have to be willing to adapt, because guys who cling to that past season and expecting it to last forever, they're doing themselves a disservice, because inevitably that time's going to run out. And then what do? Then they have like, existential crisis, whatever. Maybe you go like Dorian Yates and you go do ayahuasca and kind of get a new perspective on things. But it's tough. Guys deal with it a lot.
In your experience with those social media, obviously, because there are going to be people looking up to those influencers, those people that come across as naturals on camera and stuff. But in your experience in dealing with those individuals, how many of them really are extroverts and great on camera, and how many of them have just gotten better by doing it? How many of them genuinely you say to, yeah, recording my reels or my YouTube videos is the best part of my day. Like, I enjoy that more than anything else I do. Or is most of it just like, like kind of like public speaking? Very few people enjoy public speaking.
Yeah.
But some people are incredible at it, despite despising it. So
Right, yeah.
How much of it is that? How much or what proportion are the naturals that we think they are?
Yeah.
And then what proportion are just like, no, just do it till I get good at it?
I think so. I've definitely seen a mix of things where some people like they love their audiences and they just love talking to them. It's so cool for them to like open up a video, post something about it. They get a bunch of responses and they get to engage with a couple people. So like they do love that human interaction side. They lean more extroverted typically. And then for guys who like eventually posting videos does become a job. Like they just need to get a post out. And sometimes you can tell, other times they get really good at acting, essentially. Like, they put on a face for the camera, they say what they need to say, it's done, they post it, whatever. Typically, some of these guys will be more on the introverted side. And then there are guys who over time, like they've just developed the skill. And you see that across the board. If you ever take like someone who's like a talking head style video, like a lot of my videos, if you scroll back far enough and find my really old videos, I don't have that same cadence and liveliness to my voice as I do now. But even back then, I would get occasional comments from my teachers like, wow, like you're a very good public speaker. Like you're so quiet in class. Like, why don't you ever say anything? I'm like, I don't really know. I couldn't tell you. So I guess it did just come a little bit naturally, like the way that I communicate things and like explaining things to people. But yeah, it's a big mix.
But what I mean by that is all of those different population subsets, personality types, whatever, they're all capable of having success.
Yeah.
It might be a different route to that. So, some people just on day one in front of the GoPro or whatever are great, but all of those are getting there eventually.
I'll throw, you guys know Justin Harris. I'll throw him under the bus because he's always like a self-proclaimed introvert and like is not really a camera guy, but he's been putting in the effort of like constantly making videos. And you could tell like once he catches a topic that he loves talking about, he will ramble about it forever. He's very passionate about that. And so it's cool to see him develop that like media and camera literacy, like knowing how to communicate different topics and stuff like that. And he's a lot older. A lot of the skill acquisition will happen when you're in your teens or 20s, probably when you're the most neuroplastic. But he's proof that you can make it happen no matter what.
But it is repetition as well. I mean,
if you don't expose yourself to it, it's not, you're never going to be better.
I mean, if you look at anybody and you go deep enough in any of their socials, you're going to find they sucked. Were there any topics that you wanted to talk about that we didn't bring up?
Oh gosh, I was almost like going to start sneaking looks at your notes. Did you have anything that I'd included?
I've got a question on the side here based on some of your Instagram posts. Is what drugs do I need to take that make me sexy?
So
this is directly from some of your Instagram
posts. There's a really funny like movement, especially among like guys my age, maybe a little bit younger. They call it like looks maxing. And when you're looks maxing, you're basically just doing things to improve your appearance. And so that varies from getting a tan to improving your jawline and anything of that sort, minimizing acne. So it's a buzzword for just taking care of your appearance, like take a shower, wash your face, whatever. So this
like
is
a really boring drug.
This is novel concept for 16-year-old boys, right? They don't know anything more than a bar of soap. So it's been cool to kind of talk about things like GHK copper and the effects that it has on like skin complexion. And so in a lot of cases, it will give this like glow, which interestingly is what a lot of like middle-aged women will want. I make jokes in my videos talking about how like, you know, this isn't some scary drug. Like I guarantee you, like Karen playing pickleball is taking this exact same thing. And I've seen it before. A lot of these, you know, IV clinics, they're capitalizing on the vanity market essentially, where there's obviously like topical cosmetics, but then of course there's now injectable ones as well. And they're not foreign to that. There's Botox and everything else that they've had injected. So not too scary for them. Then extending into like melanotan 2, super popular, especially for guys who are fair skinned to begin with. Getting a tan helps with their confidence, helps with a little bit of muscle definition, helps with erections as well. So it all kind of creates this, you know, stud character that they all gravitate towards essentially.
What about the jawline? What do you do there?
Yeah, so jawline, there's a variety of different like tactics and techniques. As far as peptides, you know, I can't spot reduce jaw fat. But you know, for guys who have a little bit too much of a tendency for you know, some tenders and fries, they can take something like a GLP-1 agonist and they can just like at least alleviate that appetite if it is at an extreme degree.
Sure.
Yeah.
And is GLP-1 and all that type of stuff quite prevalent in the population that you're dealing with?
So, I mean, it's interesting, especially if you understand like the research world right now, as far as like what outlets are able to sell stuff. The GLP-1s are a very high risk product. So having it in stock draws a lot of attention from companies like Eli Lilly, Novo Nordisk and stuff like that. If not just, law enforcement officers in the United States. So the more attention you draw, the more money you make, the more likelihood that you're going to get shut down. So a lot of these companies will just ignore them entirely and just focus on non-GLP-1s. As far as like their implementation, they've been widespread and stigmatized, definitely among like the younger female audience. But given that my audience is mostly men, typically guys who just grew up in upbringings where like they weren't very literate about like what good food choices are or like what they look like, or in families where just like health wasn't really a priority. Taking a GLP-1 agonist to kind of reverse and unlearn some of those habits has been very helpful for them. And I'm talking very low doses. I don't want to push them too much.
Sure.
Yeah.
Cool. That's all I had.
How would people go about finding you?
So my Instagram is Tanner.Tattered. If you find that, there's my super link, which has all of my other channels. That is superlink.io/tattered. You can find everything there.
All right. Well, I want to thank you for coming out.
Well, thank you guys for inviting me.
It's been a great time. Love to have you back out again. Is there anybody that you would recommend that we would have on the podcast?
Oh, gosh. I mean, you already had all my friends already. You know, we had a really good conversation about the cognitive side of things. I have a friend who's super into that. His name is Julian. I'll have to get you set up with his information.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. And we're done.
Awesome.